September 21st, 2018. It's 9:40. We are in the Pasco County Commission chambers. Commissioner, would you lead us, Starkey, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I will, and welcome to Pasco.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Susan, would you read the roll, please?
Chair Jim Holton.
Present.
Melanie Griffin.
Present.
Cliff Manuel. Cliff is in Maine and sends his regrets. He is unable to join us. Mike Millett. Commissioner John Mitten.
Present.
Commissioner Pat Kemp. Commissioner Betsy Benak. Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Karen Seal.
Here.
Kathleen Shanahan. Kathleen is in Italy and she sends her regrets. Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckhorn. Mayor Buckhorn is in New York and he sends his regrets. Richard Moss from FDOT District 7.
Here.
And
John Kubler, sitting in for LK Nandem, District 1.
thank you. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Susan. Before we get started with public comment, I would like to thank Pasco County for their gracious hospitality. And Commissioner Starkey, could you tell us a little bit? I understand the facility here has been renovated. It is a beautiful complex that I have not visited recently and love the changes up here.
Yes, as you know, we're a very fast-growing county, so we're actually in the midst of renovating the third floor on this building. But I think this building has been here since the 80s. But as I was telling Mayor Kreisman, we're one of, I think there's only one other county that meets in two places. We rotate between this building and our county seat in Dade City. So we have two offices, two chambers. This one has a little more high-tech to it. The other one is an old historic courthouse with a lot of old charm. But we are trying to get tech into that one too. But we welcome you here. All our commission chambers are off to the side here. Our administration's on the third floor. We've got the tax collector in here and the property appraiser, and this is a very busy complex.
Well, thanks so much. All we need is the transit facility up here, and then we're all set, I think. Sue, would you give the PSA regarding public comment, please?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
Thank you, Sue. And I would like to add to that, we're going to have 2 sessions of public comment today. The first on general business coming before the board, and the second after the candidates have all been interviewed and make their presentations. So if you have comments about candidates for our executive director position, please withhold them until the second round of public comment. So that being said, the chair recognizes Anthony Palmieri.
I'll go with the second one.
Okay, great. And the chair recognizes Tom Nocera.
Good morning, Tbarta board members and staff. I want to just take 2 minutes to deliver a quick report or an update on developments with SkyTran, the company whose technologies we represent in the 7 counties here in the Tampa Bay area. First, 1 week ago today, what we believe was a historical event took place in this very chamber, and that was the passage of a resolution supporting emerging technologies, of which SkyTran was one of 2 companies mentioned. We greatly appreciate this first of its kind from an MPO in the Tampa Bay region who, after saw the briefing and learned more about the technologies involved, made the decision that it was something that they could lend some support to. The second thing is a development that occurred over in Israel, and that is a resort city called Netanya in Israel voted to build a SkyTran system. This vote took place about 3 weeks ago, and it's going to be built in conjunction with Israeli Aerospace Industries They're one of the technology supporters of SkyTran. They've been helping them with the design of their pods, and they have a test track there on the campus of Israeli Aerospace Industries outside of Tel Aviv. This is one of 3 systems proposed for Israel. The other 2, we believe, we'll be hearing announcements on those in the weeks ahead. The last thing I want to mention is that I want to renew our invitation to all Tbarta board members and staff to visit our office in Clearwater for a detailed, in-depth briefing about our project and our plans to move forward with what we believe will be the answer to our traffic congestion here in the Tampa Bay area. I think those that have been there have already walked away with a better understanding of our commitment to this and our sincerity in wanting to resolve this transportation or traffic congestion problem. That's our goal. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for your continued efforts in these regards. Next item of business is the only consent agenda item, which is approval of the prior minutes. Are there any corrections?
Move approval.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Is there any objections to the motion? Show the minutes approved. The next item are action items and reports. I have to go through this. In Transit Management Committee, there has been no September meeting, so there's no report. Citizens Advisory Committee, there is no September meeting and no report. The MPO's Chairs Coordinating Committee, that report has been deferred to the October meeting, given the exigent business we have today. The Policy Committee report, there's been no September meeting, so there's no report. The chair will recognize Commissioner Long now to give the Legislative Subcommittee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the Legislative Committee did meet, and we have several items that we are beginning to prepare formally to address with the state legislature. The first one is a $1.5 million recurring annual funding appropriation for Tbarta for the operations of the agency. The second one is the necessary funding to implement the 41-mile regional catalyst project, and that funding amount has yet to be determined because we're still working on finalizing those numbers with our financial officer, Debbie Leos. And the clarifying language in the statute, we're asking for an amendment so that the mayoral members of this board, Mayor Kreisman and the mayor of Tampa, whoever that might be in the future, will have the ability to appoint alternates to sit on this board so that we will not have such a difficult time getting a quorum for our meetings. And one other proposed priority has surfaced since our legislative committee meeting, and that was to amend the statute to allow our members of this board to be able to call in and be able to take a vote on the subject matters that we're talking about, because this is a large regional board. We have a lot of work to do to really get this agency up and running the way we all want it to, and it's very difficult to get a quorum. So if members are able to call in, they should be able to address properly the issues that we're taking up. There are other boards in our state who have an exemption to that statute, and our chair actually sits on one of them. So we're hopeful that we can get that addressed as well. I hope that meets with your approval this morning. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, I sit on the board of Citizens Property and Casualty Insurance, and we do allow telephonic meetings that will require, according to council and my reading of the statute, a legislative tweak. So I think we should move forward with that. And I assume that the Legislative Committee will have a substantive recommendation probably going forward as to a resolution to
Yes, we will.
to make an ask.
Yes, we will.
Any other questions of Commissioner Long in the Legislative Subcommittee report?
And for everyone's information, the organizational session will be November 20th, and we won't know until after that who the key players are going to be for this next session when they assign the committee assignments. And so stay tuned.
We all will, very enthusiastically. Okay, moving on then to the Finance Committee report, and the chair also recognizes Commissioner Long as treasurer to give that report as well.
Yes, and I would like to invite Debbie Leos to come to the podium and give the real financial report, which we're all really, really excited about. And then, as it relates to future meeting subjects, Mr. Chair, I have an item to bring under that relates to finances. So thank you.
Very well.
Well, good morning, everyone. Debbie Leas, CFO of PSTA. We had a very good Finance Committee meeting a week ago today. We talked about the financial status of Tbarta, and I'm glad to say that we have a net income at the end of the month of $86,000. Yay!
Wonderful.
They're almost caught up on paying all of our bills. As soon as we get some more reimbursements in, we will be able to do that and have a little cushion in the bank. So I'm very, very excited about that. We also spent time on reviewing the budget for fiscal 19, where we have about a $29,000 net surplus for next year, so that will be very good. Two items that I brought up during that meeting, one was Tbarta can be in the FRS. I think that is going to be an excellent tool not only for a benefit to the current employees, but to attracting new talent here. So when the new executive director, whoever he or she may be, determines that they would like to proceed on that, we can go ahead and move forward, and that is in the budget. The other item that we talked about was the capital plan and the $3.7 million of federal funding from FTA and how that will be used, and we put in a variety of items that we can shift between the line items. About $1.7 million of that is going to be dedicated towards regional planning. So we can even put more into that if the board so chooses. We held a public hearing at PSTA this week on the program of projects for Tbarta. We held it at PSTA because PSTA will be the recipient of those funds, and we will pass it through to Tbarta. We received no public comment on it whatsoever. So that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much for that. Any questions for Debbie?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions for Commissioner Long?
Yes, I just wanted to extend my gratefulness to the staff at PSTA, especially Brad and Debbie, for all the work they've done to position us so perfectly to move into the next chapter of whatever this agency will be. It's really a very exciting time, and I couldn't be more grateful and thankful for all of your hard work. And my issue with regard to future meeting subjects for the finance folks is that, again, without being repetitive, but we are a large region, and it's just lovely to be able to have these meetings in different locations so that we all have a complete understanding of the area of our state that we represent on this board. And with that said, I do believe that we are able to put in for mileage for reimbursement when we travel as far as we are today, because by the time some of us get home, we'll have another 100 miles on our...
Feeling my pain.
I hear you, but it's not just here. I mean, we went down to Manatee as well. You know, it requires a lot of time out of our day for those of us who are elected officials. It's a big commitment. And so beyond the mileage issue is the fact that being here is an added expense to our budget. And I want to ensure that we, because we've worked so hard to keep our eye on the money, are paying attention to the added expense of moving our meetings around. And so if you could do a little research into that, Debbie, and figure out what we might line item in our budget for travel, I think it would be very worthwhile.
Thank you, and I will do that. We have a line item for that. What I can do is send a travel reimbursement form out to the board that will automatically calculate the mileage piece.
Terrific.
And that just brings up the point today, you will be required to take an action on the budget so that we have it in place for October 1st. we have a resolution that will be required to be read by, I believe, Mr. Zimmett. So I don't know if you're taking the action now or at a later point.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, before we get into that item, I want to thank you, too, and thank you for bringing that to our attention, Commissioner Long. I would suggest adding, Debbie, maybe have forms available for all the members at the meetings so they could fill it out there and give to you.
Okay.
That has worked for me in previous board services, but I think that's a convenient way
Great
to
idea.
do that. So,
I've done it another
yeah.
way, too.
That being said, yeah, thank you for those comments. Mr. Attorney, could you please read the resolution regarding the budget?
Resolution number 2018-09, a resolution of the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority Governing Board adopting the final budget for fiscal year beginning October 1, 2018, and ending September 30, 2019, for carrying on the duties and obligations of the authority and providing for an effective date.
Okay, do you have any questions for Mr. Zimmett? That being said, do I hear a motion to approve the resolution?
Move approval.
Second.
There's been a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion
Jim, you do
signify
have
by
to-
saying aye.
Jim, ask for public comment.
There needs to be public comment on this as
On this
well.
specific item, yes. sir.
Okay. Yes, is there any public comment on the budget? Okay, none being heard, I will go ahead. There's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, council. Does that conclude the finance
That
report?
concludes the finance report. Thank you.
Thank you.
And-
Oh, Betsy, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you made it. Traffic was
late.
okay?
Yeah, well, interesting.
And
Hopefully you're against it.
and Commissioner Kemp as well. Thanks.
Yeah, it is, especially if you take a wrong turn.
We're now turned to the most important business of the day here, and that's the selection of a new executive director. First off, I would like to thank the entire board and especially the ad hoc committee for their hard work in screening and pre-screening candidates for your submission here today. It's been a long process. We finally got to where we need to be, and we have 4 excellent candidates to interview today. And I want to briefly go over the process, and then we'll dive right into it because that's the real business we need to get into. Briefly, Greg Mosier, our consultant, is going to introduce the candidates to us and make a presentation on each. Each candidate will then have some opening remarks of up to 3 minutes. Then we will have a round table and go around, and each commissioner will have the opportunity for a 3-minute period to ask one question, and then we'll have follow-ups to that up to 10 minutes each, and this will be repeated for each candidate. Then we will have I think after that, we will have public comment on that. Correct. Break for lunch, and have a working lunch here, and then we will have a discussion on how to move forward with the selection process. So that being said, without further ado, the chair would like to recognize Greg Mosier to begin the process.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Holton, and good morning, Tbarta Board. Just to quickly take you through the search process and how we got to where we are today. I think it was back in June that we began the process to do a national recruitment. And in doing so, we advertised the job over a 2-month period publicly, both on Tbarta's website and in various publications across the United States. At the same time, and in conjunction with that, I did a national recruitment and targeted particular candidates that I thought met the profile of what you were looking for in an executive director. I think we received over 75 applications. I reviewed all of those applications to determine which candidates met minimum qualifications, which one had the skill set, the presence, the interpersonal skills of what you were looking for in an executive director. We ultimately shortlisted 9 candidates that the ad hoc committee reviewed for the position, the executive director position. We held a meeting, we went through those resumes, and ultimately selected 6 of those 9 candidates, applicants, to be shortlisted. Those 6 candidates prepared a response, a video response that was recorded to 3 different questions that the ad hoc committee asked of those candidates. Everybody was given the opportunity to review those responses. We held a meeting about a week and a half ago where we actually went through and watched those responses, evaluated their responses of the 6 candidates, and ultimately settled on 4 of them to be finalists. And those are the 4 that are here today. I have conducted background checks, reference checks on all of those candidates. Their background checks included criminal, civil, educational, employment, financial, the list goes on and on. There's nothing that I saw was any substantive issues where I would have concern in continuing to recommend those candidates to you. The candidates arrived on Wednesday evening. Two of the candidates are local. They had the opportunity yesterday to take a tour of the region. They visited HART, they visited PSTA, they took a tour of the alignment of the Tbarta BRT line. They were given the opportunity to meet with board members individually. They also had the opportunity for a meet and greet yesterday, as well as staff at PSTA, staff at Tbarta. So I think they had a full day of opportunity to get to know the region, get to know the organization pretty well. I would say your 4 candidates are very excited to be here and very interested in the position, and I know they're looking forward to answering any questions you have today and presenting to you. So if there's any questions from the board, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, thank you very much for your service, Greg. This has been a rewarding experience for all of us, and I think we have a good group to pick from today. So
Thank you.
You've done an excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you going to present then go ahead and present the first candidate?
Sure, absolutely. So in the interest of time, we talked about doing this alphabetically. I think we're going to go a little bit out of order because of some flight schedules for some candidates. So our first candidate is David Green. David Green was most recently the CEO of the Greater Richmond Transportation Company up in Richmond, Virginia. David is been a CEO for the last 5 or 6 years. He worked for Richmond for almost 20 years of his career. He had completed several substantive projects up in the Richmond area and decided it was a good time to make a transition. He had positioned the agency in a good place to make that transition, to leave it for someone else to continue to run the operation there. So he is interested in this opportunity available and looking forward to talking to you.
Certainly. Bring him in, please.
Good morning.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Green. I'm Jim Holton. We had a chance to meet yesterday and have a brief discussion, and thank you for that. I'd like to start out by saying, first and foremost, thank you for your service to this country. We see from your resume that you are a veteran and have served in the active reserves in Iraq, and we want to thank you very much for that service to our nation.
Thank you.
And we look forward to this discussion today. We would like to begin with you giving us a brief, and try to limit it to about 3 minutes. If you need a little more time, that's fine, too. To tell us about yourself and some opening remarks on why you think you would be a good fit for Tbarta and your enthusiasm about the Tampa Bay area.
Well, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is David Green. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me to participate in this part of your interview process, and just want to say how excited I am to be here. I have been in the transit business for the past 19 years with GRTC Transit System in Richmond, Virginia, and I guess you could say I took a non-traditional route through the ranks of transit. A lot of people start in transit in operations, and I kind of did the opposite. I got into it in the business and administrative side of things. Started with GRTC in their finance department as assistant director of finance, helping with things like accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, generating financial statements, that sort of a thing, and then got into grants management, and I was directly involved in working with FTA frequently, applying for grants, and with Department of Rail and Public Transportation, which was Commonwealth of Virginia's organization that oversees transit. From there, I moved into the area of procurement, got involved in contracting and overseeing everything that the organization purchased before I branched out and started getting involved in other aspects of the company when I became chief of staff and ultimately chief executive officer. And I've served in that role for the past 4.5 to 5 years. We completed a lot of great projects at GRTC during that time. Aside from working at GRTC, as you mentioned, I am in the Army Reserves. I'm anxiously awaiting my retirement in the spring, which will bring me to the end of a 30-year career. I currently serve as the Chief of Internal Review for the 80th Training Command located in Richmond, Virginia. And Chief of Internal Review is just a fancy term for the guy that oversees the internal auditing. And we basically review we review programs and processes to make sure that they comply with policies and procedures that they are supposed to comply with. I have been in the Richmond, Virginia area the majority of my life. However, I was actually born in Detroit and am cursed as a lifelong Lions fan. But I am happy to adopt a second team and would love to be able to follow an undefeated team. And if anybody would like to share with me what it's like to have an undefeated team, I would appreciate hearing about that. But, you know, I applied to Tbarta because of what you all are involved in. I have heard from colleagues in the industry and from things that I've read online and in industry-related magazines, the projects that you all are considering here, BRT being one, and BRT was a project that we have just completed in Richmond and actually opened for service 3 months ago. And the projects that we were able to work on at GRTC are what interests me. That's what excites me. And again, that's what interests me in Tbarta. The other thing that interested me in the position is the regional aspect of the organization. GRTC is a regional transit company. We operate in 5 different jurisdictions, fixed route and BRT in 2 jurisdictions, and then we have express service to 3 other jurisdictions. There's also a regional MPO that serves 9 jurisdictions, and I serve on the board of that. So I'm a regional guy, and I like working on regional things. It's just a broader perspective, and I think the regional nature of what Tbarta is, again, just interests me in this position.
Thank you so much. What we're going to do is go around and give each board member an opportunity to ask you one question and your response, and then we're going to have follow-up on that and discussion. So appreciate you taking the time. Why don't we start at the very end down there, and Commissioner, could you start with the first question?
Would you please share a 3-minute biographic sketch with us? That was it?
Yeah, that was pretty much it, I think.
I'm sitting in for Secretary Gwynn. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. What is your view, what in your view are the most significant challenges facing Tbarta and transit in the Tampa region over the next few years, and how would you address them?
So I think first of all would be advancing the project, and we were able to attend a tour of the project corridor yesterday, the BRT corridor along 275, and it sounds like there was a lot of good planning put in place. It sounds like there's a good solid team that's in place that has prepared that. I think continuing that momentum, continuing with the public outreach, meeting with folks, soliciting input is very important in making sure that people are comfortable with what that plan ultimately becomes. And then I think working with the jurisdictions and the political bodies, elected officials, to make sure that everybody is comfortable and on board with moving such a project forward.
Thank you. Mayor Kreisman.
So you described one of the projects that you worked on during your time in your position with is with the BRT, and obviously we've just been talking a lot here about this proposed BRT route. So if you would go into a little bit more detail about your role in bringing that project to fruition and any of the experiences you had, good and bad, that would translate to what we're trying to do here.
So my role in that was basically GRTC was the project sponsor. We were the face of that project, and I oversaw the implementation of that project for the organization. The plan was finished back in 2014, at which time we submitted a Tiger grant application for funding, and we were successful. So we solidified the federal funding. We received $25 million in federal funding. It was one of the largest grants that was awarded in 2014, one of the 3 largest of 797 grant applications. We solidified the state and local funding, and we immediately started with 0 to 30% design, and we awarded that contract for the design work. Once we completed that, we continued to move the project forward through the City of Richmond processes. We had to go through the Urban Design Committee, the Planning Commission, and then ultimately go to City Council and meet with council people to explain the project to them, make sure they understood it comfortably to vote on it. And they did. They approved what was called a development agreement, which was an agreement between all of the project parties. And then we moved into final design and construction. The entire process from the Tiger grant to opening the ribbon cutting was 4 years. And it's been a very successful project so far. Ridership has exceeded the daily goal. Daily goal was 3,500 riders, and we're now at 6,000 riders per day.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Commissioner Kemp.
Well, I was also going to ask about that because you're one of the two out of 4 candidates that actually have transit experience. And I was really interested in your experience with your BRT project, and we talked about it a little yesterday. And as I told you, this I consider to be an express bus project that we can handle without all of this infrastructure and spending money. I mean, I think we actually already have it handled. But outside of that, I was really interested in your BRT project. So that was, your agency now is smaller than HART or PSTA, but you had this project that's 7.6 miles long, and it's at street grade level through the city of Richmond, correct? So can you describe more to this board? Because, I mean, what we're talking about is on the highway, regional thing, which is a whole different thing. And I'm really interested in the project you did, which turned out, as you said, twice the ridership that was projected practically.
Yes. So the study looked specifically at the Broad Street corridor, Broad Street being the most heavily used corridor within the city of Richmond. It's an urban corridor. It runs through downtown Richmond, 7.6 miles. And we looked at light rail as well as BRT. It was rapid transit. We wanted some form of rapid transit. And the study ended up recommending BRT as the solution because it's so much more affordable than light rail, less intrusive from a construction standpoint, and it just makes more sense. More and more regions throughout the country are moving that direction. 14 station locations, 26 platforms, has most of the bells and whistles that you can get with a BRT project. Level boarding, traffic signal priority equipment, ticket vending machines, off-board fare collection, improved crosswalks, dedicated travel lanes through roughly 50% of the corridor. It was a traffic calming measure. Broad Street originally was 6 lanes, 3 going in each direction, and the 2 center lanes through much of the corridor are now for buses only. So it reduced the number of travel lanes that general traffic is able to use. We have dedicated lanes both in the median and then in another section of the corridor along the curbside. So there are stations in both locations.
And the cost of the project for the 7 miles was how much?
$65 million was the budget.
How many stations did you have?
Commissioner, we wanted one question each, so we can elaborate a little further.
I just wanted to elaborate there to get all the information. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioner Starkey.
Can you describe your vision for Tbarta 10 years from now? That's a toughie.
It is a toughie. And you know, my vision would be what really is the board's vision. So I'm not very familiar with the Tampa Bay region, and admittedly, I'm not very familiar with Tbarta. I know how you all are set up to, you know, fund, operate, develop, plan for transit, you know, and my role as executive director would be to execute the board's vision, and I would need to get to know you and the different jurisdictions and what your priorities are, but I would want to help take the Tampa Bay region and Tbarta to wherever it is you all would like to see it go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes. Can you tell us an example, I guess, during the time of the planning and the implementation of the BRT program you worked on, where you had to build a consensus with a political board, albeit board of directors, city council in Richmond, and then sort of related to that, any conflicts you encountered and how you overcame them?
One conflict, it was related to the timing of implementing the BRT project, but also with the timing of implementing a route redesign. We were doing both things at the exact same time. In and of themselves, you know, they aren't a problem, and our recommendation was to do them separately. BRT was new to Richmond. It was something that people there, you know, after talking to them over and over and over again and doing multiple presentations, you could see in their faces they still just couldn't wrap their heads around what it was. They didn't know what BRT was unless they had been to another city and had seen it and possibly ridden it somewhere else. So it was a completely new concept to people. Coming up with a campaign to educate people on what BRT was, how to drive along Broad Street with now dedicated bus lanes, our customers, how to use ticket vending machines now, which had never existed in Richmond before, was all brand new to them. At the same time, we had a route redesign that was happening. The entire route structure within the city of Richmond was changing. And our recommendation was to do those things at different times. We wanted to implement BRT first and then come in about 3 months later with the route redesign. In working with the city of Richmond, which is one of the joint owners of GRTC, their preference was to do them simultaneously, which we were opposed to. We could not find any other transit company in the United States that have done both of those sorts of things at the same time. This was unprecedented, but that's what they wanted. They made an informed decision, and so we moved forward with that approach. But we did, you know, meet with the elected officials to explain the risks in doing such a thing, and they advised us to do them together, which we ended up doing.
Were you proven right by your initial advice?
There was still some confusion. I mean, we executed it very well. We did both of those things very well, got great feedback, but there was still a lot of confusion amongst the customer base. No matter how much information you push out to people, there are going to be folks that just don't get that message. And they could be regular bus riders. I mean, we posted information on the buses. We made announcements on the buses. We ran TV commercials. We put information in newspapers, pushed information out via email. But there are people that still just, they didn't know. They didn't understand. And it made it a little difficult for them.
Okay. Commissioner Long.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for your military service. As the mother of 2 grown boys with type A personalities, I'm very grateful to you. You certainly, by your service and your continued service, show that you have a public servant heart, which is very important to me. So my question is twofold. What is the significance and importance of the triennial review? And what is the outcome if you receive a poor review?
A triennial review is something that the Federal Transit Administration does on transit companies every 3 years, and there's a laundry list of areas that they look at: finance, procurement, maintenance, DBE, lobby, lots of different things, grants administration. We have received a triennial review, I believe it was 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, and we received absolutely no findings with ours. And FTA, our Region 3 office is in Philadelphia. That's our regional office. They were unbelievably happy with the results of our review, and they said that we were the first transit company in Virginia to receive a review with no findings at all. Having findings are not necessarily bad. It depends on the extent of the findings. Having multiple findings is definitely a red flag and not in anyone's best interest. There was an agency nearby that got an opposite review than what we did, and there is a lot of oversight that FTA places on such organizations, and there are funding challenges. The FTA is not fully confident in continuing to provide the level of funding to certain organizations that show that they are not able to manage the funding that they are already receiving. So it gets into credibility, and you end up having to dig yourself out of quite a hole.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. David, I was looking at the history of public transit in the Richmond area, and there is a very rich history, I think one of the longest continual transit operations in the nation. And that's a testament to the good folks of Richmond and the past few years, your abilities. Obviously, there's still some things to do, and kind of at the height of your career here where you have brought Pulse to fruition, I'm curious as to why you want to leave your original home state, hometown, to relocate to Florida at this juncture. We think we have a great state and are proud of it, but I'd like to just hear from you, kind of at the pinnacle of your career, your interest in relocating here to Tampa Bay.
Well, the short answer is the work is done. You know, the most fun that I had at GRTC in my role as CEO was working on projects. That was exciting and fun to me. That's what got me out of bed. And we did a lot of amazing things. We completely transformed the company in less than 5 years. And once we implemented the route redesign and we launched BRT, the last two remaining things that I needed to get done were contracts. One was with Virginia Commonwealth University, which was to bring them on board. They had a redundant transportation system, and in having conversations with them over the past 5 years, they were at a point where they wanted unlimited ridership for their entire population, which is 50,000 people, staff, students, and faculty. We got that contract done, and they wanted that in place by August 1st, which was a heavy lift because when we first started talking to them back in February, they were thinking August of 2019, not 2018. So we had to work with them very quickly in order to pull all that together. The last thing that I wanted to get done was a contract with Richmond Public Schools, which would provide an ID and bus pass to every high school student in the Richmond Public School system, which would give them unlimited free ridership on GRTC, which would give them the opportunity to explore the city, get out of their neighborhoods, and give them access to after-school activities, libraries, and anywhere else that they might want to go, particularly jobs. I got all those things done, and quite frankly, there was nothing left to do. Everything shifted into an operations mode, and that's not my background. It's not my wheelhouse, and you know, there aren't many things that GRTC has left to work on right now. The biggest thing is maybe making some improvements to bus stops and making them more ADA compliant. I'm looking for another challenge. I want to work on another big project, and again, that's what attracted me to Tbarta. It's what attracted me to the Tampa Bay region, because I continued to hear over the past year or two about these BRT projects and transportation projects that you all are thinking about, and I would just love to be a part of that, and I'm ready for the next big challenge in my career. It's time to move on. I've been at GRTC 19 years. A lot of people can't say that they've been with an employer that long, so I'm just ready for the next big challenge and ready to move on professionally.
Thank you. Melanie.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How have you leveraged technology in your roles to date to improve efficiencies and communications, be it within your team and then also to connect with the public?
That was probably the biggest change that we made within GRTC. I mean, on the most basic level, social media. When I took over as CEO in 2014, we had no presence on social media whatsoever, zero, not even Facebook. So we started Facebook, Twitter. That's what we did a big survey project, and that was some feedback that our customers gave us, is that they wanted to be able to receive information via social media. Aside from that, we replaced fare boxes throughout our entire fixed route fleet, which gave us the capability to change our fare structure, our fare media. We went from magnetic swipe cards to proximity cards with chips that you can tap, smart cards. So we changed the technology of our fare boxes, our fare media. It allowed us to implement a mobile payment app, which we now have in place that works not only with our fixed route buses, but also with the BRT. Our customers love that. It's, younger people love technology. Everybody likes their smartphone. They like to be able to use technology for everything. And that was the feedback that we received. And we really took the company from a very basic low level to a high level. And we have things in place at GRTC now that a lot of transit companies in large cities don't have. The ticket vending machines that we put in place for BRT are the latest generation machines from this particular vendor. We're the first company in the United States to implement these particular ticket vending machines. So it's just something that I've been proud of, being able to raise GRTC to that next level technologically.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Green, thank you again for your interest. The professionalism and knowledge and experience you bring meets or exceeds the intent of the entire search, and so appreciate your interest. My question is, given your research of Tbarta in the area and the challenges and opportunities that we have, if you were to be given a magic wand and you could change anything about Tbarta, what would it be?
Well, I think initially it would be to elevate its profile and primarily have a larger staff. From my understanding, it's a very small group of people that work at Tbarta right now, and there's a reliance, I guess, on some of the transit partners, which is fantastic. But I think Tbarta needs to become more self-sufficient. And I think it would be beneficial to recruit its own human resources to take care of its own particular challenges.
Thank you.
Commissioner Seal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a really great discussion yesterday about how you obtained the Tiger Grant, and to me it demonstrated your ability to go after federal funding and wrap it all up. Tell the story that you told me yesterday, because I went after Tiger funding and it was a very, very difficult thing. And tell your ranking as well.
It's a little bit of a story. So this was my first month as CEO, and we did a basketball game sponsorship at VCU for the VCU Rams. And as part of this sponsorship, we got a suite to be able to watch the game. And after halftime, a halftime radio interview at court level, I went back up to our suite, and our governor at the time, Governor McAuliffe, was in the suite, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go talk to him. So I went over and introduced myself, and he said, well, why don't we have light rail in Richmond? And I said, Governor, I don't think the region's quite ready for light rail yet. We're just trying to do BRT. So I explained to him what BRT was, and we had just completed the rapid transit study at the time. Within a couple of weeks, the announcement for the Tiger Grant applications came out. And so we got a team of folks together with the state, GRTC, City of Richmond, and Henrico County, and we started working on this application. And we pulled together 27 letters of support. Tiger applications obviously are unbelievably competitive. Everybody applies for them. They're able to apply for them, and they do. The Governor McAuliffe, put his support behind one single project in Virginia, and it was ours. We got letters of support from our two senators up on Capitol Hill. We got letters of support from VCU, the Chamber of Commerce, City Council, every business organization and political organization that was willing to stand up publicly and support this particular project. We submitted it. There were 797 applications that went in for funding, and we were one of the top 3 in the United States, coming in at an amount of roughly $25 million. And we laugh that, if we would have known we were going to be that successful, we would have asked for more money. But we were just, it was a great process to be a part of. Secretary Fox came down from Washington, D.C. to do the press release and the announcement at our Main Street station in August, and it was just something that our entire region was proud of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Banat.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a nice conversation, too. Your very laid-back demeanor is extremely impressive, given the different groups you have to work with. So I'm curious to know, what is some of the most contentious issues that you've had to face in whatever role, and how did you work through some of those contentious issues? You know, we have so much contention when we're discussing, you know, what is the best way to move forward, but we know we have to move forward. So I'm curious to know how you would approach some of this contention that we have.
The projects that I mentioned are obviously very contentious, and they're that way everywhere. And, you know, again, you're going to have people who support those sorts of projects, BRT or route redesigns, and you're going to have people who oppose them. And the small groups of opponents, you know, in many cases are very influential, and they know how to oppose a project. They're almost professional at it. They know how to get the ears of their elected officials. They will say things that just aren't true. You know, lots of smoke and mirrors. So, you know, we constantly would have to meet with elected officials and make sure that we shared facts with them, make sure that they received the most current, accurate information to clear up any misunderstandings that people in the community might be trying to communicate to them. You know, we were fortunate that the jurisdictions were they both saw the value of this particular project, the BRT in particular, the value in it being an economic development project as much as just a transportation project. So, you know, from the government standpoint, they got it and they wanted to see it move forward, but then you still have the public out there that will try to delay it. And so helping them navigate through that process safely and comfortably, you know, was a heavy lift sometimes. We had to provide some insulation for them.
Yeah, thanks.
Next question.
Yes, I work for the Florida Department of Transportation, and we often engage in conversations related to connected and autonomous vehicles and how it might influence our infrastructure of the future, and what do we need to do today to better position ourselves for that. So do you envision connected and autonomous vehicle technology influencing future decision-making at Tbarta, and if so, in what fashion?
Without a doubt. Autonomous vehicles are on the way, whether anybody wants them to be or not. You know, transportation, it will change more in the next 10 to 20 years than it has over the past 100 years. And if people are not thinking about autonomous vehicles, then I feel like their heads are in the sand. They're just kind of in denial because it is on the way. I feel like it's the space race, you know, back in the 60s when everybody wanted to be the first to land on the moon. And I think that's what these technology companies are doing. They want to be the first to have a fully autonomous vehicle. And transit makes a lot of sense for autonomy because especially if you have dedicated corridors that are segregated from general traffic and you don't have all that other conflict to worry about. It's all the much easier. There's testing going on in Europe and in many cases in the United States with smaller vehicles, you know, 10, 12 passenger vehicles. They're testing them already to act as shuttles in transit-type corridors. So I think Tbarta would absolutely have to consider that and work with FDOT in making future decisions now, planning for the future.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. We are going to have another round of follow-up questions now, and we'll proceed from this direction again. And David can amplify some of his prior answers or head a little bit in a new direction if the
So we
question...
can go in a new direction?
Yes, sir.
I was just curious. You talked a lot about federal funding. With that, what were some of the major pitfalls that you saw with federal funding and what you did with some of the projects that you had worked on?
I didn't see any pitfalls at all. I mean, transit companies rely on federal funding. You know, FTA and federal funding exists for capital purchases. They will help you buy vehicles. They will help you invest in technology. They'll help you buy facilities, improve technology, but they don't support operations. Operational dollars have to come from the localities and from the states. So, federal funding is critical, though, particularly from a state of good repair standpoint, in keeping fleets current. As new as possible. That helps from an operational standpoint in reducing maintenance costs. Okay. But we didn't have any pitfalls. We had a great relationship with FTA.
In Virginia, can I ask another question, or is it just, are we limited just to the one?
What's that? No, there's a follow-up. You're allowed a 10-minute time frame, but if anyone wishes to give their time up or move forward more rapidly, we can do that too, and we encourage that if there's not too much follow-up.
Right. Yeah, and I guess in Virginia, where you're from, what was the current state contribution, the local contribution versus the federal contribution?
It differs from company to company, actually, as opposed to companies within states. We had probably 20%, we have a $52 million operating budget. Probably 20% of that came from the fare box, advertising revenues, those sorts of things. I would say a little bit more than 50% came from local governments, City of Richmond and Henrico County, as well as some of the other jurisdictions that received commuter service. The state probably 30% to 40%, with the remainder coming from whatever operating dollars we could get out of our capital contributions from the federal government.
Okay.
Mayor Kreisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tbarta has had its share of challenges. I'm going to stay on the financial questioning. Over the years, from when this entity was first created by the legislature, and so I guess my question to you is, how do you plan on addressing or working within the financial challenges that we currently have, and do you have any ideas for us in moving forward of other areas of or other ways to generate or acquire the revenues that we need to really take this organization to a different level?
I guess I would need to understand exactly what's in place now, what the challenges might be, who the partners are currently, where the funding is coming from. And then, once I have that understanding, I could better offer some ideas and suggestions. I don't fully understand the dynamics of where the funding comes from for Tbarta. I know there's some that comes from the federal government. I don't know how much. I know there's some that comes from the localities, the state. I don't know the percentages and the dynamics of all that.
Commissioner Kemp.
I was interested in the question that was asked about automated and connected vehicles. Certainly, there's been a lot of discussion, but there's been no presentations and no kind of back and forth about this. And often I hear the heavenly picture of how everything is positive about moving forward with automated vehicles. How it will somehow end our congestion, make our, end accidents, do all this. We've seen some significant drawbacks just recently. The woman that was killed in Arizona. I know that we were having an automated vehicle demonstration, and we just received a letter from the federal letter saying that they were putting a hold on any of these projects any longer at this time. I can also imagine a lot of nightmare scenarios, a bunch of negative, instead of single occupancy vehicle, negative occupancy vehicle filling up the roads. Everybody goes to pick up somebody after a game. What happens at major intersections? All that. I just wonder if you can comment on those challenges as well, and because you talked about a dedicated corridor, which would be very limited then, and we haven't talked about a dedicated corridor with this project. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to have you address some of your thoughts on that more broadly.
There are a ton of concerns about it. For every person that you talk to that is fully in favor of autonomous vehicles, there's another that has the exact concerns that you're talking about. Capitol Hill has a big challenge ahead of them, and they're going to have to figure that out legislatively, how to regulate these sorts of things. And, you know, the technology companies don't have it all figured out yet. They're still testing, and there are challenges, again, you know, with the accident that you're referring to. You know, it's not a perfected technology yet. So there is a long road ahead before all those things are worked out. There are a lot of problems that need to be solved and decisions that need to be made. But I feel like it is going to be a part of our future at some point in time.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm really satisfied with the questions I've heard, but I and your answers. But I do want to say, I bet when we switched from horse and buggy to the car, we had some challenges there too. But I too want to thank you for your military service. I have family members serving right now. I guess I will touch on one thing. With such a small office now, you're going to have to wear many hats. And maybe talk about your experience understanding budgets. That would be important to me.
So when I was in the finance department, I actually was responsible for developing operating budgets for a few years. And as CEO, obviously, I was responsible for managing the budget and making sure that we stayed within it and came in under budget each year. I mean, finance is my background. I'm very comfortable working in that space. And as the grants manager, I was the person responsible for actually developing the capital budgets and how much money we were receiving from the FTA and the state each year, how that money was going to be programmed on what projects, making sure that it was spent in accordance with the purpose for how it was programmed. All of that. Budgets is my background.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
Mike?
Yeah, kind of a two-part question. I guess number one, if you could kind of describe generally what your leadership style has been or is. And then the second part of that is, you identified earlier that the staffing at Tbarta will need to increase as the agency grows. What is your approach to staffing, finding the right person for the right role? Maybe give an example of how you did that in the past and how that worked.
So leadership style, I mean, participative, democratic, however you would want to call that. You know, I like to discuss with staff, as many staff people as I can, things that are happening, things that we're moving forward with, challenges that come up, problems that arise, to make sure that things are looked at from all angles. You know, things sometimes spread into areas that you just wouldn't realize unless you talk to people about it. So I like to be able to take time, when possible, to talk to as many staff people as I can to fully understand the details and the depth of certain things that we're working on, and to get input from as many people as we can. Sometimes you don't have time on your side and you've got to make decisions without getting input from as many people as you would like, but that's my preferred style. I'm a very laid-back, hands-off manager. I don't like to micromanage. I certainly can if I need to, but if I'm in that position, then I don't feel I have the right person in that position. I have been in a situation in the past where I had to make a difficult decision and replace a person in our finance department, our CFO, and put somebody in who I felt could provide the type of leadership that I was looking for.
Commissioner Long.
Well, I had two great questions for you, David, and in your responses to my colleagues, you've answered both of them already, so I'm not sure I think that's so great, but I just thought of another one. This is a very diverse board, and it's an interesting board because we have elected officials sitting on it at all levels of government, and we also have gubernatorial appointees. And so my question revolves more around your thought process with helping a diverse and large board see what success looks like and how to strategically plan for that success.
I think communication is going to be critical, and I would need to rely on you all if I'm selected for this position to understand what your preferred communication methods are. Do you like one-on-one phone calls? Do you like one-on-one face-to-face meetings? Do you like emails? Do you like information presented to you in a board meeting situation? I would want to understand how you want to receive that information. My preferred style is face-to-face one-on-one meetings. I'm just comfortable in that situation. I can read body language. I can get a sense for if somebody's understanding what I'm explaining or if I need to explain it a different way to help them better understand what I'm trying to tell them. But I just think there's going to have to be a lot of communication, and I'm going to have to rely on you all to let me know what you're getting, what you're not, what you want information on, more, less, all of those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner. My follow-up question basically are about the kind of the comparison of the Pulse project and what we envision here. And the first part of that is scalability. By all intents, it was a very successful project. It seems to be laid out well, planned well. You received awards. I think the total budget was $65 million, if I read correctly. Obviously, what we are envisioning here is a much larger process. Do you see any issues or difficulty in scaling your abilities to meet the larger demands of more money involved?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, you can do portions of the project first, follow them up later with additional extensions. You could do the entire 41 miles together. Again, it depends on what makes sense for that particular region. There is no one-size-fits-all model that has to work. It's what makes sense for you all, and it can be done any way you like. The budget will change if you phase it and do one now and then another later and another 4 or 5 years later. Construction costs obviously are going to change, so the budget's going to be a moving target, and that might be a difficult concept for elected officials to understand, because a lot of times they want a number. What's the number? What's my cost going to be? But if you're pushing it out in the future and kicking that can down the road, cost figures are going to change.
Yeah, and my second part to that question was, again, and my compliments to a great project with Pulse. Everything I have read about it was magnificent, well received in Virginia, awards, everything. I noticed and I wouldn't say they're not real negatives, but they did come in a little later than schedule and slightly over budget. Can you just briefly give us an explanation of that? Was it economic conditions, or was there?
It actually came in under budget and exactly on time.
Okay, well, the Richmond paper probably had it wrong then. So.
Yeah, I don't believe everything you read in the Richmond paper. The contractual completion date was June 30 of 2018. Okay. It was an incentivized contract with an early completion date of October 2017. Okay. That's what the state wanted. That's what the governor wanted. The governor was leaving office at the end of 2017. And he wanted everything done possible to get that project completed before he left office. If the contractor completed in October 2017, they would receive $3 million of incentives. And every month or a couple of months thereafter that it opened, they would lose incentives. The $3 million would ultimately go down to zero. The completion date was June 30, and we opened prior to that. So it was technically on time, but it was later than we hoped for. Oh, okay. The budget, the original budget, the planning level estimates were about $50 million. We went through a value engineering process to determine a little bit more specifically what the costs were going to be, and they came in higher. We brought VDOT into the fold. VDOT was taking over as the construction manager. It was a roadway project, which was completely in their wheelhouse, and they had a lot of resources to be able to manage those sorts of contracts. They had those vendors. So they went out to bid, and the bids came in a little higher than people expected. The lowest bid brought the project in at $65 million, and the other two higher bids were at least $10 million above that. So this particular construction company left a lot of money on the table. But because they didn't achieve the incentives, it came in under budget, and it was actually on time.
Well, I love hearing the press is wrong. So thank you for that candor very much. Melanie.
Knowing that you'll need to work closely with both the board and staff, my question is that on a personal level, I'd like to know your best run and why you picked that one. Knowing that you're an avid runner, so best long run and why? Or I guess 6 miles is a short run, but.
Yeah, I've only done one long run, did a marathon once, and I'm good. I'm not to do any others. I've never been in so much pain in my life as the day after that particular race. I completely mismanaged it. I got to the 10-mile mark, and they announced a time of 60 minutes. Which I was completely shocked by, and I hit a brick wall at about 18 miles, and anyway. But yeah, I've cut back to 10Ks.
Are you satisfied with 18 miles?
I'm a retired mayor. I hit the same wall, although not nearly as quickly, so I'm with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've had lots of successes in your career. Can you tell us about a failure and what you learned from it and how you overcame it?
Yes. GRTC has been in search of a permanent transfer center for probably 25 to 30 years. Companies do what's called TDPs now, Transit Development Plans. Back then it was COAs, Comprehensive Operations Analysis. It was identified 25, 30 years ago, the need for a permanent transfer facility for the GRTC system. We've been looking for a location ever since, and we have looked at many locations, and none of them have ever come to fruition. There was one in particular that we identified within the past 2 years. It was a Salvation Army site. They were trying to find a new location to move to, and they were willing to sell us their property. And we were going to demolish it and build a facility. We helped them identify some locations. They found one that was suitable for them, but by the time they submitted an offer, somebody else had already jumped on it, and it fell apart. Talking to a council person, we shifted gears to a property directly across the street. It was about 1 acre in size, 3 property owners in total. Most of the parcels were owned by the city of Richmond. We contacted the 2 other private property owners. We secured those sites with letters of intent to purchase, and then submitted an unsolicited offer letter to the city to purchase all of their parcels to lock up that entire block. It was zoned properly. There was no rezoning that was going to be necessary. We could do this property or this project by right. We talked to some business owners in the area. One of the biggest challenges they had was parking, not enough parking. So our plan was to build a transfer facility on the ground floor with 450 parking spaces above it. Win-win. And we were moving forward. And unfortunately, the small group of opponents that always appears with certain projects popped up, and again, very influential people got with council folks, and we just couldn't get it across the finish line for one reason or another. There just wasn't the political will to make that happen. So that was a failure. We couldn't close the loop on that particular location.
Any learnings from that?
No, I mean, just, brush it off. I mean, the NIMBY folks are going to come out, all the time. It's business as usual with transportation projects. Just, gotta get back up and try again. And fortunately, there is a Coliseum, a new Coliseum project that the city of Richmond's working on. It's a whole redevelopment north of Broad Street, 5 blocks by roughly 5 blocks, and they want to redevelop the entire area to include a brand new Coliseum. Mayor of Richmond said, hey, if we include a GRTC permanent transfer center in this area as part of our overall development project, would that work for you guys? And I said, absolutely. And thank you for thinking of us and including us in your project. So that's actually currently being pursued now.
Thank you.
Mr. Seal.
Yes, thank you.
Is there anything that hasn't been asked of you already that you might want to share something else with us?
I have no idea. I don't think so. Personality. Should I share what I shared with you yesterday?
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs, you all know Myers-Briggs and all the different personality styles, and I am an ISTJ, if you ever...
I knew it!
If you look up ISTJ, you will probably see my photograph there next to the description, strengths, weaknesses, good, bad, and ugly.
Thank you. Briefly following up with that, you're lucky I didn't ask you the animal question. That was going to be my natural extension from that as well as yesterday. So I thought the run was a little bit more fun and easier.
Commissioner Bernack.
Okay. Tbarta's kind of unique. I mean, we have PSTA, we have HART. Virtually all of us have our own transit agencies within our counties. And so Tbarta is trying to figure out, how do we become a regional transit agency? And some of our transit agencies provide some regional service. But can you think of something that is similar that you've worked with, or a model that you would think of trying to emulate when you come to Tbarta?
Nothing that I know of, but, and I was wondering the same thing, because I obviously know of HART, I know of PSTA, just from being in the transit industry. We have been in search for dedicated funding in the Richmond region forever. We don't have a dedicated source of funding. We rely on the localities to come up with money from their general funds every single year. And we are, desperately hoping for a ballot measure at some point in time for maybe a 1-cent sales tax or something like that to help fund transit. There is an organization in Richmond called the Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and I talked to them and their executive director about the idea of, if something like that were to occur, could they be the recipient of the sales tax and then just contract out to GRTC? So in a sense, they would be our client. We would provide the service still, but report to them, the funding would flow through them. I'm wondering if that model could possibly work here. I don't know. Where Tbarta is the recipient of funding, not the operator, but PSTA and HART possibly continue to operate, and Tbarta becomes the client. I don't know. It's an idea.
Thank you.
That is great food for thought. Last question.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, David, for your candor and being forthcoming with all these questions. We very much enjoyed interviewing you, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you all, and hope I have the opportunity to work with you all in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Greg, can you introduce the next candidate, please?
So returning back to alphabetical order, our next candidate is Carrie Butler. Carrie's currently the general manager of Lextran in Lexington, Kentucky. Previously, before that, she worked at TARC. It's the Transit Authority of River City, which is outside of Louisville. It's the greater Louisville area, I should say, as their head of planning. She has been the CEO for the last 4+ years. By background, she got her master's degree from the from Florida State University, and has, I believe, extended family in the Tampa Bay areas, which is part of her desire for an interest in this position, among other things. So,
Okay, thank you. Can bring Carrie in.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Good morning, Carrie. You and I had a chance to talk yesterday. I'm Jim Holton, Chair of Tbarta. Welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming down here. And we won't talk football like we did yesterday. So we have a diverse group here with Gators and Knowles and everything else.
Okay, great.
And you're a Kentucky person, so
yes.
Basketball's off the table.
Yeah.
But anyway, the process will be, we'll give you 3 minutes of introductory time to tell us a little bit about yourself, why you want to come to Tbarta. and your experience, and then we will have a round of questioning by the board members.
Okay, great, thank you.
You have the floor.
Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and I appreciated the information we got yesterday, had a tour, and thanks to the staff of Tbarta for their welcome and information we got. So I currently serve as the general manager of LexTran, which is the transit agency in Lexington, Kentucky, oversee all operations, management of that organization. We provide fixed route service, van pool, and then also complimentary ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act paratransit. Prior to that, I served as the Director of Planning for TARC, which is the transit agency in Louisville, Kentucky. I oversaw all aspects of our planning, from the short-range scheduling all the way to our longer-range, long-range plans in the community. TARC operated in 2 states and multiple counties in each state, so it was a bigger service area, and also oversaw the on-street infrastructure program there, which was our park and ride lots, bus stop shelters, and the like. In between those positions, I have served or worked at in consulting roles, but mostly working for public sector agencies or transit agencies, so I feel like I have worked a lot with transit over my career, either in a public-facing role or as a private sector supporting them. I also briefly had my own company called Civic Connect. We were focused on community engagement and public involvement. It didn't last a very long time, but I had the opportunity to work for LexTran and took that as an option. But I have always had an entrepreneurial spirit, so my entree into having my own company was, I enjoyed it. It was a little short-lived, but I do see that there is a lot of relevance in this position and the opportunity now with Tbarta that matches nicely with my experience, both understanding transit really from all aspects of the organization, and then also some of my work in the private sector and having my own business even for a brief time, but that sort of entrepreneurial, how you have to get things started and moving on your own.
Thank you, Carrie. Start with the questions.
Good morning, how you doing? In your view, what is the most significant challenge facing Tbarta and the transit in Tampa Bay region, and over the next few years, and how would you address these issues?
I would say it would appear, and again, I'm not an expert on your region by any means, I think a number one thing has to be funding. There's a referendum in November for Hillsborough County, and in some of the discussions, it does seem there is maybe funding available for some projects, but it hasn't been accessed, and then maybe not enough funding for others. So I think funding is a key challenge, maybe not number one, but certainly critical. And then I think getting the projects prioritized and aligned with the vision of the community and what needs to happen, I think, is the second piece. So I think it's getting the funding allocated appropriately, and then prioritizing those projects and getting them in the prioritization order.
Thank you. Mayor Crossman.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Can you describe a project, a transit project that you've worked on in the last 5 years, what role you played in that project? Was it implemented? Project costs, source of funding, that type of thing?
The biggest project I worked on in the past 5 years was at LexTran. We did a headquarters project, which included moving from our existing facility, combining our administrative offices, doubling the size of our maintenance facility, so a complete new campus, new headquarters, and at the same time we took delivery of CNG, compressed natural gas, and battery electric zero-emission buses. So it was a lot. It was a big project, a 14-acre site, $26 million, included financing multiple public federal grants, as well as a little bit of state funding, some local dollars, and then a new market tax credit program in order to leverage some of those funds. So it was a relatively complex real estate deal, if you will. One other thing, if I can, this was 5 years before, but a project I worked on in Louisville was to leverage local dollars from the Metro Council, which is the elected officials there, to access local dollars to match them with federal to make pedestrian improvements throughout the district that serve transit. So that was a project that I was particularly proud of because we did some internal restructuring of how we manage that, and then also worked with the different council districts in Louisville. So it was rewarding both, and they have continued on with that work even to this day.
Thank you. Mr. Kim.
When you talked about funding before, so do you think that there'd have to be local funding provided by each of the jurisdictions? Could you imagine where a jurisdiction would not be contributing any local funding, and how would that work?
Well, I don't know that you could force the local funding, but certainly if you want to leverage federal dollars, that comes with the local match, as you know. That could be local, county, or city revenue. It could also be state dollars. They consider local, or state. And so I think that's always the kind of a push-pull in transportation funding, is being able to take advantage of those, not take advantage, but leverage those federal dollars, but using the local dollars to make the local dollars go farther. So I guess it would depend on the project, really, and with the federal funding, the sort of downside is the restrictions or the guidance that you have to follow when you do those federal dollars.
Thank you. Mr. Sharkey.
Good morning. Welcome to Pasco County. So we're looking at doing a BRT project. I wondered what your experience, or if you have experience in BRT, or if you not share your knowledge about BRT projects, I guess is my question.
Sure. Okay, so when I started at TARC in Louisville, we were working on a New Start's light rail project. Prior to it becoming a light rail project, we had looked at the idea of it being a bus rapid transit project, but by the nature of the corridor and the uses, we're pushing forward with light rail. Unfortunately, that project got on hold due to funding and competing local dollars for a larger highway project. So I moved into a different role at TARC. Right now at Lextran, we have done an alternatives analysis, feasibility study alternatives analysis for bus rapid transit on a main arterial corridor. I would kind of liken it to Dale Mabry here in Tampa, sort of similar, with a lot of land uses, intense land uses on the side. So with the headquarters project that our agency did, that I mentioned before, I don't know that we're quite ready as an organization or as a community to take on another big project. I think we will shortly. I think our land use planners and the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, is eager for us to take on that next step. So that's probably my closest practical experience with bus rapid transit. Some of the other projects I worked on as a consultant had BRT components as part of them, looking at the technology, some of the other things that support the service, not just the service on the street, but the infrastructure or the intelligent transportation systems, ITS, that go along with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Good morning. If you were to become the executive director, what would your short-term and long-term goals for the agency be? And how would you gain the confidence of this board and key stakeholders in achieving those objectives?
Sure. Short-term, do you mean like a 90-day, 100-day plan, or short-term like a year?
Good question.
I'm sorry. I'm a planner, but so.
Given the pace that transit moves, I would say a year.
Okay. Okay, great. So I feel like I heard pretty clearly that a project, something, shovels in the ground, a project is critical for the organization, and I think it's probably critical for the community as well to see some progress and some change and some movement in this idea of regional transportation, which I will say I applaud the community for doing it, because it's a heavy lift. People don't think regionally. They travel regionally, they do things, but they don't think about transportation regionally unless, you do it. So I applaud the community for doing it. So I think in the short term, a year is to get a project started, get something going. I think that would be very critical. And then maybe in the long term, have something else ready to go and in the mix. I think building the trust with the board would have to come through communications, maybe not more meetings, but at least some one-on-one, getting to know the community, helping me understand the districts and the constituents that you represent and what their issues are.
Thank you. Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Carrie, and thank you for being here. My question is two parts. What is the significance and importance of the triannual review? And what is the outcome if you are not dotting your I's and crossing your T's?
So the triennial review is the opportunity that transit agencies have every 3 years to document and prove compliance on any number of issues. I think there's 16 areas of compliance: Title VI, financial stability, service, relationship with the MPO. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but essentially you provide documentation and information to FTA, Federal Transit Administration, every 3 years that your agency is in compliance with all 13, however many areas there are. So it's a very big deal. I mean, it is most likely the most important thing that agencies go through every year. It starts with a desk review where you transmit into the cloud all the information, and then there's also an in-person review. It's conducted by consultants who work for FTA to look at everything, and they can ask for, it's an audit, essentially, is probably the shorthand way to say it, but it's an audit of everything you do, top to bottom, in the organization where federal funds have been applied. And if you don't pass, or they have findings similar to an audit, you would be at risk of losing your federal dollars. So it is absolutely a critical thing. I mean, it's all hands on deck during triennial review time.
Thank you.
I'm glad it's only every 3 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Carrie, for coming. We enjoy your talk today. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the kind of the breadth of your experience as general manager. Does it encompass budgeting, strictly planning? Is it administrative work? Is it oversight work? You know, give us a kind of a cook's tour of what a general manager is in your organization.
Yes, 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 and then 1,000 other things. Other duties as assigned, what has come up on any given morning. So it really is a broad spectrum of everything in the organization, and I have a great staff. We have a senior management team and assistant general manager, so they do the management, but it is overseeing maintenance, operations, human resources, finance, the budgeting. Community relations is our marketing and advertising group, as well as out in the community. Procurement, which handles the compliance. They take the lead on the triennial review. It's also coordination with our labor group. We have Amalgamated Transit Union, and so managing the relationship with the union and doing the contract negotiations every 3 years. So anything that comes up on any given day we have to deal with, but we have a great staff. Our transportation supervisors, our street supervisors, and our bus drivers really provide such a wonderful service to the community, and they're at the heart of what we do. So, I mean, you name it, it's probably come up.
Gotcha. Thank you. Melanie.
Yeah, I was like, good morning. My question is, how have you leveraged technology both within your organization to improve efficiencies internally, as well as then to connect with the public?
Oh, excellent question. Tech is a huge part of what we do in transit right now, and a very wise question between the internal improvements that we can make as well as external. So we have, most recently, we revamped our scheduling, human resources, and then payroll service. So it's a software provider that does kind of an integrated platform for those, which was an improvement over the previous version that we have. At Lextran, we have a technology provider that has onboard equipment, computer-aided dispatch, automatic vehicle location. I don't want to throw too many acronyms out there, but that allows us to have an information feed that transmits to our passengers either on their phone or on a website about where the bus is and when it'll be there at their bus stop. There's a little bit of technology that's in the maintenance department for fluids and fuel management. Trying to think. We have also use technology for our paratransit customers so that they can get a notification when their ride is on the way. Really the next step and kind of the challenge, I think, for LexTran or many transit agencies is how quickly technology changes. And even though our system at LexTran was 2010, it feels like a dinosaur now. So we're looking to replace that. It also feeds into our voice communication system, the radio. So there's a lot of advantages, but it does get tricky and it can get kind of costly too. I could probably talk for 2 hours about technology, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Butler, thank you again for coming and applying, and the energy and the excitement is awesome. Your experience in planning and the research that you've done on Tbarta, is there anything at the strategic level and the planning side that jumped out at you while you're doing your research that you say, well, maybe this is something we need to relook?
No, and I guess I may be hesitant to answer that question because I don't know that I know exactly enough without, looking at the studies, looking at the plans. There's nothing that really jumps out at me, but I would have to be honest and say I don't know enough about on the ground what the community's saying, what their needs are. I think understanding more about the local providers, whether it's Pasco Transit or HART or PSTA, I think is really key for regional regional transit, is to see how those local networks can feed into more of a cross-county or regional travel. And I don't know enough to answer that thoroughly, but I think that would be the place where I would start to look at, is understanding more about kind of the local needs and local service as well as what's on the books and planned.
Thank you.
Commissioner Seal.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to let you all know I have another appointment, but I am going to call in so that I'm participating in the meeting during my travel time. So thank you. I enjoyed our interview yesterday. And so my question to you is, what is your proudest accomplishment?
Oh, well, one of them is one of the employees that I supervised at TARC said that I was the most fair boss that he had ever had. And that meant a lot to me. So maybe not in workplace, that was a proud accomplishment. Finishing our headquarters project at LexTran and moving and not having any disruption in service. We had to take the buses out of one garage one morning, and then bring them to a whole new facility the next day. I was pretty proud of that. We didn't have any loss of service. So those are probably two proud moments. Of course, children, marriage, all that. But from an employment standpoint, employer, those are definitely proud moments for me.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Banac.
Yeah, it's good to see you here. Nice that you were able to come back to Florida. I said yesterday's heat was enough to drive anyone away. It's probably no different today, actually. The question I have, and you run a transit agency, and you referenced that we have different transit agencies. You know, we have HART, we have PSTA, we have our local jurisdictions. Are you familiar with anything that is like Tbarta as far as an organization trying to pull together some very urban areas and not urban areas into a regional transit system? Is there something you're familiar with that might be something you would like to emulate for Tbarta?
Sure. I don't know that there's anything I would say specifically to emulate right away. I would want to know more, but I think that Greta, and I cannot do the acronym by heart, but that's a similar organization in the Atlanta area, which is a huge metropolitan area. So I think Greta has tried to do some of the similar work. I think the places where I would most gravitate to are the Seattle area. They have City of Seattle, King County Metro, which is the transit agency, Sound Transit, which is another more of a regional agency. I don't know enough about their structure, if it's just interlocal agreements between the agencies, but they are doing a lot of good work. Seattle's one of the places that has had an increase in ridership, where some of the other industry has seen a decline. So I think that's a good relevant example. They also have water surrounding them, so I think there's some geographic replicability. I think Vancouver is another one where they've done some regional work, maybe a little bit outside the scope. Chicago has some regional practices. They have CTA, they have Metro, they have PACE. They've done a little bit of that, so I think that those would be probably the most relevant U.S. models, Vancouver, Canada. I think there may be some lessons learned from Europe. That's always a risky thing to say, well, let's look to Europe. I've been forewarned about that in my career, but there may be some structures there. Their funding is different in how they operate in contract operations, but there may be some things there to learn as well.
Thank you. Last question, please.
Yes, at the Florida Department of Transportation, we've had numerous conversations about how connected and autonomous vehicle technology could influence our decision-making regarding our transportation infrastructure as we go forward. Do you envision this connected and autonomous vehicle technology influencing future decision-making at Tbarta, and if so, in what fashion?
I think so. I think automation and connected, specifically autonomous vehicles, are going to be an impact everywhere. The timing, I don't know how long, is that is it 5 years, is it 10 years? But I think it will make an impact everywhere. I think where I see connected autonomous vehicles really playing a role is they are a way to provide service differently, you know, an alternate service delivery method that fits very well with the land use and development pattern that you see in many kind of 1950s plus, 1950s on development patterns. Not the, sort of traditional, close-in urban neighborhoods that were originally served by a streetcar, but more of the commercial auto-oriented development patterns. So those connected autonomous vehicles, I think, can be a critical way to provide service in those areas, whether it's through a private automobile or through a public, more shared ride service. So, I mean, I can't predict the future, but I certainly see the impact, and I see some real benefits to how transit agencies can operate or how freight can operate. So I think it's key. I don't know that anybody knows the answer, but it's certainly exciting.
Thank you, Carrie. We're going to have a round of follow-up questions, and I would urge all our members to keep the tempo going because we are running a little late, and my timekeeper here always reminds me of that. So we'll keep it going, and we appreciate her candor on that. So please follow up.
You mentioned the light rail project that did not get completed. To what extent did it move forward?
We were in preliminary engineering and looking at the cost justification and the new starts, which is the ranking process for federal transit capital projects, and didn't look like we were going to bode well from a cost justification and some of the other criteria, so just the agency felt like it was a wiser choice to put it on hold because of the competition for local dollars. But we were in preliminary engineering.
Okay. The technology you talked about, what's the new technology that you're not using now that you would like to use in the future?
So there's
at this point.
Yeah.
It changes so fast.
So there is the possibility to use voice over internet protocol for your voice communications with your buses. I think that would be the next thing that we would look at, and how to integrate our CAT AVL system with a voice over internet VoIP system. Most immediately. There's also some of the technology that are software systems and applications you can use to monitor engine components for maintenance and do some predictive maintenance. Now that's a little inside for transit, but those would be the things that I would be looking at for our agency next.
Okay. And one final question. With your experience with federal funding, what are some of the potential issues that you see if a project does use federal funding?
I mean, no issues really, other than you are typically applying for federal funding for a certain grant program or certain allocation which says this project must meet this criteria. So if it's a New Starts, which is a capital investment grant program, it has to meet this criteria X, Y, and Z. If it's Tiger, Transportation Investments Generating Economic Recovery, it has to meet this criteria. It has to be multimodal, this, that, and the other. Then there's a few other projects that are even more specific. I think Pinellas Transit PSTA got a Mobility on Demand Sandbox grant, which was very specific with what it was doing. So you have to make sure that your program of projects or your capital projects can be aligned with grant programs that are available.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you. So the type of transit utilized sometimes can be very contentious. We often hear discussions focused on high-speed rail or light rail or BRT, or now we're obviously talking about autonomous vehicles. So my question is do you see all of these transits seem to be land-based or road-based modes of transit? So are you open to alternatives such as water-based transit or elevated aerial transit? And if so, what do you see as potential advantages maybe to looking at different modes of transit as opposed to focusing on one specific mode?
Sure. I would not necessarily want to speak for the community on this, but I can give you kind of my personal viewpoint where I am. I'm pretty mode agnostic as a transit planner. I think you have to do the mode that makes sense in the corridor and with the surrounding land uses. You know, there's a whole lot of decisions that make sense with the particular mode. I think, you know, the trend, if there was one, towards bus rapid transit was certainly because of the excitement and interest in the New Starts program, which was primarily a rail program. I think a lot of agencies got in line for that funding, so to speak, and then the pot ran a little short, so they started to move towards lower cost bus rapid transit alternatives. I think the idea, and I don't want to be too controversial, but I think given the relationship to water here in the area, I think that ferry is at least an interesting thing to explore, to see how it goes. There's you know, other areas where ferry service, it makes a big impact. Seattle is one of them. They do a tremendous amount of ferry service. So I think that is exciting and at least of interest. When you get into some of the other more unique modes, maybe like the aerial or a funiculator, there's a lot of different transit nerd stuff that you can talk about. I think those become where you can get kind of quickly on the bleeding edge of technology, cutting edge, bleeding edge. So I think you want to weigh those carefully from a community standpoint. But I feel pretty mode agnostic. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Kemp.
Well, I'm happy to hear about your mode agnosticism. I'm a big ferry supporter and others. Other interest in other modes than we've been pursuing here. But there has been, I think, headlong, more than the rest of the nation, with the state of Florida, and in particular with this area, in the interest of a few legislators, a huge push towards connected and automated vehicles. But I feel like it hasn't been a very vetted idea or discussed idea at all. That there's, I feel like, in fact, the push is so premature. I like proof of concept. I would just as soon have somebody else do it first and start to see what the issues are, because I'm concerned about this, because I think that we're going to end up with how aggressive we've been about this. We will be the Betamax of AV. So I was very interested in hearing, one, that you considered it kind of a suburban service, like first last mile kind of thing, where, you know, that you don't see it working, or at least preliminarily, in an urban environment, which I agree with you from what I analyzed. But how would you go about bringing some education and discussion to this? Because I think, you know, there's many examples of how the automated vehicle connected fantasy could be a nightmare.
Sure.
But I think there's not a lot of measured discussion. Yeah.
So it does feel a little bit like the Wild West with autonomous connected vehicles, certainly. So there are some Transportation Research Board, there's a lot of research studies doing it. I think that the key piece of connected autonomous vehicles, and I keep using connected because that's the clear thing. There's already autonomous vehicles out there, extended adaptive cruise control, but the connected piece is where you can really see the benefit from a community standpoint. That's where the local city roads department, county roads department, the state DOT is going to have to be an important player in that too. So I think that some of it is getting the infrastructure in place, whether that's Wi-Fi or other technology to keep those vehicles connected, is a key piece to really see the success. So that's going to be a joint effort amongst a lot of players in any region, certainly.
But a follow-up is, I think I'm not talking necessarily about the implementation of the technology as much as having a pre-consideration by any community that is wanting to invest in that or push that forward as an option, because it doesn't seem to be much discussion about what the implications of such things are. Like I say, everybody, you know, a negative we have single occupancy vehicle. There could be a world of negative occupancy vehicle without the road space to occupy. How do everybody
Sure.
gets picked up from the stadium after the game? How does that work?
Yes, exactly. And I've had that same thought, which is where the connected piece comes into play. It's like, I've said that, well, you're never going to be able to serve a big football game or a big stadium with everybody driving in their own car. It's exactly the same thing, even if they're not driving. But if you get connected vehicles, you can get a little bit of that mass transit efficiency there. I think the key piece, and this is where I would sort of advise local government, is it is something you want to get a little bit out ahead of, because if there's not language in place or policies or at least some consideration or a framework, autonomous vehicles may just arrive in your community. Same thing with bike share, scooter share. Stuff can just come in, and some of those impacts can, business, curbside access, how do people stop, where do they park, kind of going around. So I think it is something that communities should get out ahead of a little bit, even if it's just having kind of a plan in place. But it's certainly a little bit of the Wild West, I'll fully admit.
Thank you. Commissioner Starkey.
Mr. Chair, just before you go
Yes,
on,
sir.
I just want to announce that Commissioner Seal is on the phone and is hopefully able to hear what everybody's saying and participate.
Karen, can you hear us okay?
Karen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Welcome back and safe travels. Are you in an automated vehicle?
Hands-free.
Yes. Anyway, we're moving on, and when we get to your turn, we'll recognize you. Thank you, Commissioner Starkey.
So why do you believe you are well-suited and most uniquely qualified to lead Tbarta as executive director?
I think I would refer back to kind of my opening statement, is my experience in the transit sector, both from a insider or, working in the agency and being the executive of our transit agency, as well as the work I've done on the private side as a consultant. I think sort of those two things blended together well positioned me for this role at Tbarta.
Mike?
Yeah, thank you. How would you describe, or what would your approach be, I guess, to combining the resources and the strengths of both the public and private sector for a large regional transit project like BRT, just in general? And then separately, what experience have you had? Maybe give an example of when you brought those two communities together to work on a project.
Sure. So I think the sort of path of least resistance for public-private partnership here is with station area development or joint development. Transit-oriented development is another acronym that has been successfully done in many other places, where the transit line is here and around the station you are developing it. I think there's a number of places where some things like that are already planned here. So getting those agreements in place, and there is a large body of knowledge and work that's been done in transit on how to set up those relationships, how set up the partnerships, how to have those partnerships meet the federal requirements if you are leveraging federal dollars for those. So there's certainly a lot of work that has been done that can be followed along there. I think my experience is maybe a little bit on the smaller side, where you have, as a transit provider, you have to work with local businesses. Your bus stop is in front of their shop. You might have a shelter, you might have a transit station, and some of it is not necessarily partnerships where they are receiving any money or benefit from the transit agency, but developing those relationships with businesses or real estate developers is critical for anything that you do in transit, because you go everywhere, or many, many places, so you have to know a lot about the community.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. I actually am very satisfied with the information I've already received, so I do not have a follow-up question. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Carrie, I wanted to expand upon a little something we were talking about yesterday in our one-on-one. And that, and we've touched on TOD today a little bit, and public-private partnerships. We are, interestingly, a 5-county organization here. and obviously there are certain county and city needs in the geographic reach that we expand to. And we talked a little bit, and you had some concepts about how you could have maybe uniform zoning and connectivity in those different TOD developments and stations that are offloading the BRT or whatever mode we eventually choose. Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because you said you had some experience with planning that.
Sure. So sometimes what you'll see in a zoning code or a land use code is an overlay district. So it might be a corridor, or sometimes it's a historic district, sometimes it might be a corridor where the design standards may be similar, or they may be so that you get a consistent look and feel along a corridor. So that's one mechanism for the land use planners or the zoning board to consider that you could do along a corridor. You could change some of the parking standards. That's a huge piece of transit, that if parking is cheap and parking is free and easy, people tend to drive their personal car. When it's harder and more, they may look to other alternatives. I'm not saying you should do anything with parking cost, but that is certainly one thing that you see a correlation between parking regulations and then transit use. So those are things from a regulatory standpoint that you could look at doing along the line to sort of incentivize transit, the use of transit, as well as making it more palatable for developers to do there, because they don't have to spend money on parking.
Thank you. Melanie.
How does your team describe your leadership style, and what do you do to motivate and celebrate them?
I am definitely the idea person and bring a lot of energy to our team, so I think sometimes they get tired of me. But no, we have a great relationship, and we've done some different type of meeting formats, because I think from a senior staff, you can get a little tired. You kind of do the same thing. They go around the table. So we've varied up our meeting format and how we kind of strategize and prioritize projects. So we're a close team. We see each other every morning. We do a 5-minute standing meeting, so we kind of know what's going on every day and can give the thumbs up, or maybe kind of, oh, here we go, another day like that. So that's kind of how we structure ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, and spending time with us. And Mr. Chair, I am happy also with the answers I've heard and have no further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Benak.
I'm good, too.
No further questions. Thank you.
Gary, thank you so much for your time.
Karen.
Oh, Karen, yes, Karen, I didn't see you there, so I've got to visualize. Karen, any follow-up?
Thank you. I guess I'd like to just ask you if there's anything else that you haven't shared already that you would like to share with us.
I think the only thing is I am a passionate believer in what transit does for individuals, and I tell our bus drivers we could do a graduation ceremony, and I tell them you have the opportunity every day to change somebody's lives, and that's what I think I've been passionate about in my career, and where I feel very grateful the opportunity to serve communities and serve the people. So that's it. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
So, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Just so the members know, the restrooms are located through this door, except that door looks like someone closed it and it's locked. So if you need to, is it open? No, I'm like,
Do you want me to go around?
looks like it's locked.
Yeah, I would think in keeping with that, I'm going to ask for a 5-minute recess for a break here.
So
You need to
there's
adjourn for
another restroom through those doors, but I'll try and get this door open.
Okay.
I don't have my key on me, of course.
The door at a time. You have it. Fine, how are you? Oh, so I'm going to go get some coffee.
I know. We had fun out there. Speed this process. I was trying to set this up. I didn't know, you know. That's what you
Cliff Manuel. Mike Millett.
Present.
Commissioner John Mitten.
Present.
Commissioner Pat Kemp.
Present.
Commissioner Betsy Benak.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Karen Seal.
Present on the phone until 12:15.
Kathleen Shanahan. Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckhorn. Richard Moss.
Here.
John Kubler.
Present.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Susan. We will resume with the interviewing process now. The chair recognizes Greg Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next candidate, following alphabetical order, is Scott Collister. Scott was most recently with AECOM. He's also served for over 6 or 7 years as the Director of Transportation Development for the District 7 for Florida DOT. Scott has been a resident of the area for quite some time and is a registered professional engineer and has an engineering degree.
Thank you. Bring in Scott. Not a bad idea.
Did he leave?
Good morning, Scott. Welcome. I'm Jim Holton. You and I had a chance to chat briefly yesterday at the meeting, and I thank you for that. Our process today will for you to give about 3 minutes of introductory remarks as to your interest in Tbarta and why you can be a good lead for our agency. And then we're going to have a round of questioning by the panel here and then a follow-up. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for your service to this country. We owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you very much, sir. With that said, I'll recognize you to make your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the board, for giving me this opportunity today to present to you my qualifications to serve as the Tbarta Executive Director. My professional engineering experience is a unique combination of active duty service with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and over 20 years in the private and public sector delivering transportation infrastructure in Florida. My military career included assignments of increasing responsibility and accountability and was focused on leadership, project management, and project delivery. As a consultant, one of the unique assignments I had was to serve on-site with the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, supporting their mission and also delivering a Better Jacksonville plan. I served through 5 budget cycles as a Director of Transportation Development at Florida DOT District 7 here in Tampa. I was responsible and accountable for a staff of 193 state personnel supported by consultants to deliver our work program. I had 5 departments: intermodal systems development, consultant project management, district design, right-of-way, and surveying and mapping. I had the opportunity to lead a project team for a 4-year period to deliver the largest and most complex project in District 7's history, the I-4 Crosstown Connector that linked Interstate 4 with the Leroy-Selman Expressway. This was a very unique project using a public-private partnership method of project delivery. The build finance method was only one of 2 projects delivered in the state, and that process was delivered by District 7. A highly successful project required extensive coordination with a lot of stakeholders. It provided regional connectivity between these 2 systems, supported hurricane evacuation, and had a huge safety benefit to the city of Tampa and Ybor City by removing a significant amount of heavy truck traffic from Ybor City. The opportunity to serve Tbarta would give me the opportunity to work again with the same stakeholders I worked at while I was at District 7, including the mayors of Tampa and City of St. Petersburg, the MPOs, county and city public works staff, the Downtown Partnership, the West Shore Alliance, and the CEOs of the Port of Tampa, Tampa International Airport, and the Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority. I have a unique perspective of Tbarta, having been at the department when Tbarta was created. after the completion of the Strategic Regional Transit Needs Assessment. And I watched the involvement and the hard work that Tbarta initially did to define the transportation needs of our region. I also have a clear understanding of Federal Transit Administration requirements for the Construction Investment Grants Program, as well as the policy the acting director has currently issued for how that program is to be administered. A couple of the comments she's put out that are of significance are that approval of construction grants are discretionary, and the decision factors include the local financial commitment, project readiness, and geographic diversity. I believe my qualifications are aligned with the requirements and challenges of serving as a Tbarta Executive Director, and I would definitely welcome the opportunity to serve Tbarta and the region to deliver projects that provide a clear choice of increased mobility for Tbarta customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Start the first round of questions.
Good morning. In your view, what are the most significant challenges facing Tbarta and transit in the Tampa Bay region over the next few years, and how would you address these challenges?
The most significant contributions are the ability to put into the ground or deliver a regional transportation system for the benefit of our region. As the members of the board know, the level of congestion is continuing on our roadway network, both the state system, the national highway system, and all the local arterials, because the growth is just so dramatic in our region. So the ability to deliver a system that would provide a choice to new Tbarta customers into our region would be huge.
Eric Kreisman.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. What do you see as, or what would be your short-term goals and long-term goals for Tbarta, and how do you define short-term and long-term?
Mayor, I would say short-term would be really in the next year. I would make it that small. Long-term, I would go 3 to 5, or 2 to 5 in that area. Short-term goals would be to really elevate the recognition of Tbarta as clearly the regional leader for the development of transit. I'm confident I can do that. That would require a lot of focused communication with all of our stakeholders, probably expanding our network of stakeholders to some extent, and being very clear that we're focused on delivering the Catalyst project, as well as maintaining our development of the other projects that are in the queue. That would be really what I do in the short term. There's an awful lot of heavy lifting that has to be done to deliver the Catalyst project. And so that would be clearly a focus within the first year. Hopefully that could then, well, it would mature beyond the first year when we get into the project development phase and have a little more meat and potatoes to discuss with all the project stakeholders. But then it would be advancing the other projects that are in the queue that have been identified as priority projects for that longer term period.
Mr. Kemp.
You mentioned the Catalyst project. So in terms of funding the Catalyst project, if one of the jurisdictions involved will not contribute to the Catalyst project and is not interested, where do you see the funding coming from? How do you possibly implement, or can it be implemented if one of the jurisdictions don't agree or don't want it?
Commissioner, I think there are alternatives to look at for financing the project. Of course, we have the primary financial opportunity would be the capital investment grant from the FTA. Other options could be the tourist development tax that's been mentioned, although the back of the envelope estimates I've done of that's not a large amount of money that's there. A state infrastructure bank loan or a federal infrastructure bank loan is an option. A federal TIFIA loan is an option, and I only mention that because it could be appealing for this project because there's a 5-year deferral before payments start. It's still a 30-year loan, and it is a loan to finance the project. But clearly, some of the new and innovative methods of financing would be to pursue value capture. Those include like a tax increment financing zone. I know the city of Miami has done that for Miami-Dade Transit recently. Special assessment for parcels that are within the footprint of the stations. Joint development on land that's owned by Tbarta. And lastly, perhaps developer impact fees. And I might mention when I was at the department, we did a project with Hillsborough County where they financed part of the widening of US 301 through developer impact fees.
Right, but all of that requires county to either accept the loan or
Correct.
or the fees. All of that would need a jurisdictional approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Starkey.
So what do you think would be your most difficult challenge in the first year?
I think the most difficult challenge would be getting the message out, sharpening the message and getting the message out not only to all of our stakeholders, but also to the public, and making the public much have a greater sense of appreciation and a better awareness of this project and what we're trying to achieve.
Hi, Scott. First of all, thank you for your military service. Could you describe a time or an example where you were not able to achieve an objective of your organization, whether it be with ACOM or FDOT, and then what you might have learned from that experience and how that would bear on this role as executive director?
Well, I would go to a project that was in Pinellas County that Commissioner Seal was well aware of, and other members of Pinellas County are probably aware of, and that was trying to deliver the replacement of Pinellas Bayway Structure C, one of the two toll structures that were out there. The toll system for Pinellas Bayway is codified in the laws of Florida. We started down a path working with legislators, the Pinellas County delegation to change the Florida statutes. And after the bill was introduced in Tallahassee, that bill was removed. That was very unfortunate at the time. It was very disappointing to us at the department because we clearly recognize the need to replace that structure for the benefit of the public as well as to improve hurricane evacuation from the coastal area of Pinellas. I think what I learned from that is we really should have studied and war gamed and thought a little bit further. What are the decision branches and what are the options, beyond that, and had a more concrete plan B for moving forward. Ultimately, the bridge has been replaced and is a very successful project for the benefit of the community. So that would be my comment there.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Scott. Thank you for being here today. My question is twofold, and I would like to know, if you know, what is the significance and the importance of the triannual review, and what is the outcome if you do not dot your I's and cross your T's?
Commissioner, I would have to plain ignorance for not knowing what the triannual review is you're referring to. The only document I'm thinking in terms of transit and the transit development plans, which are codified in the Florida Administrative Code, is a different document.
No.
So I'm not familiar with that. I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Scott, again, thanks for your service to our nation. And as you know, both you and I were involved with DOT during the I-4 connector, and I want to thank you and former Secretary Don Skelton for his exceptional work during those years, and Central Office in Tallahassee. That was a hard effort to get that done. And kind of for the benefit of this board, we all lived and breathed that, and I was, as you know, intimately involved in that, both in Washington and Tallahassee and everywhere else. Can you take us through that and your role in that I-4 connector?
Well, it was a little unusual in that shortly after I got to the department, I learned we were picking up the design of this project because the design contractor was with the Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority, and the decision had been made that the department would pick it up and execute the project. A couple of the difficulties were clarifying and then obtaining all the right-of-way that was required from CSX. My staff at the department said, CSX is difficult to work with. We have a hard time communicating what our requirements are. The time reviews are very difficult. And I said, well, how are we doing this? And they said, by phone and fax and letter. And I said, well, that's a non-starter. You're going to go to Jacksonville and sit down in CSX headquarters and discuss with them face-to-face. And over a series of trips, that was very successful in getting all the right-of-way, which is one of the key items resolved and taken care of. One of the issues we worked through with the City of Tampa and Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority was resolving a NEPA clearance item for McKay Bay Park, which is adjacent to the southern end of the project where it connects back into the Leroy Selman. And again, once our project team sat down with the City of Tampa Parks and Rec Department, explained what we could do, understood their needs, got commitment from them, then went to Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority and got that done as well. That was how we were able to resolve that issue. But by far, the biggest item I learned was how well the project was received when it was explained clearly to the public and to our constituents. In particular, the Port of Tampa, who was just really looking forward to having exclusive truck lanes because they understood the benefit it would provide to the operation of the port and again to the community. Then another major lesson I learned that was of huge significance was the 5-year planning and budgeting we did for every category of funds to deliver the project. That was significant because during the recession when the funds were removed and then we had to substitute federal stimulus funds, we could clearly see in the project where those funds could fit into the system and how we could then deliver the project and provide assurances to central office that there are no unseen issues here in delivering the project.
Thank you, sir. Melanie.
Good morning. How have you used technology, both internally and then externally with the public, to leverage it to improve internal efficiencies with the teams with which you've worked and then to communicate with the public about projects on which you've worked?
Well, again, the I-4 connector was a great model of that because one of our consultant firms delivered a very well done conceptual fly-through. And since that time, the ability to animate and show a project has advanced significantly. People can now take drone overflights of a corridor and wireframe in CAD software. Wireframe is just outline what the project will look like, and then animate that so you can actually see the project being built and have a better perception of what it looks like at the end. One of the other latest technology tools that I've discovered that I understand Ford Pinellas has also looked at is there's a company in South Florida that's developed software you can load in zoning requirements and building code data, and it will allow you to look at transit-oriented development or development on a particular parcel. It'll allow you to make changes on the fly and go in and change the building setbacks, building heights, or other characteristics of the area, and it'll model what you can actually produce there. I think a tool like that would be tremendous for us to communicate with the city of St. Petersburg and the city of Tampa and say, let's look at these station locations and see what we can do what the opportunity is to develop transit-oriented development.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mitten.
Thank you. Mr. Collister, thank you again for your service, and thank you for being willing to take your vast expertise and experience on behalf of the transit users of our region. Tbarta is very diverse, a lot of dynamics, different things that make it up, and I guess my question would be, based on your experience and your research on Tbarta, if we were to give you a magic wand and you could wave it and change any one thing about Tbarta, what would it be?
Well, a magic wand, if it truly was a magic wand, the only thing I would change would be to solidify the authority's funding. I know that's been a challenge since the authority was created. We have a vast responsibility, and in order to achieve that responsibility, you need to have resources to do that. That was one of the significant benefits of working at the department, was realizing, and I finally referred to them as the consultant army that worked for the department, this vast resource of consultants that we had that, of course, are willing to do anything for their client, but then managing that resource in a way so you could get the work done in a manner to still execute the project and put it into the ground. So I would say, from a magic wand standpoint, it would only be to solidify the annual funding for the authority, so that we could then add the staff that we need to deliver the projects and manage our responsibilities.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bedan.
Yeah, my question is somewhat similar. Because you've been involved in very large organizations, and Tbarta is such a small organization, how do you think you would transition into working with, just such a small staff, but needing to fill so many roles, putting agendas together and pulling all this? How would you see that transition?
Well, step one would be to get a better feel for the staff, that's there now. I don't know them at all. Getting a better feel for the staff that's there now, I would add to that kind of the milestone events, or what we're looking at for the locally preferred alternative, and that milestone date of when we're actually going to notify the FTA that we're going to advance into project definition. And then working backwards from that, I would say, okay, what staff do I need to bring on board in order to manage a consultant effort of $5 million and do all the coordination that's necessary with all the stakeholders in 3 counties for this job? So we kind of put those two things together in order to do that.
Next question, please.
At the Florida Department of Transportation, we spent a fair amount of time having conversations about connected and autonomous vehicles and how it might affect our transportation decision-making and our infrastructure looking to the future. Do you envision connected and autonomous vehicle technology influencing future decision-making at Tbarta, and if so, in what fashion?
I think the first place, that's a great question, thank you. I think the first place that autonomous vehicle connectivity would impact our projects would be making the connections in that last mile that connect to the system. I think the technology is advanced with autonomous people movers of a smaller scale. So I think in particular for a bus rapid transit project or even a light rail project, I think that would be the first place or the most significant place it would be at. Only 2 years ago, Qatar did some research, did some outreach to transit vehicle manufacturers. And surprisingly, at that time, in 2016, there wasn't a lot of effort being made to implement autonomous vehicle technology into their vehicles. Of course, the upgrade to the infrastructure the department is looking at doing for the infrastructure on the national highway system and the state highway system, that connectivity as well, and the ability to have transit vehicles, be they rail primarily, but bus vehicles, to have a more sense of awareness of what's going on in the envelope around them as they're navigating down the system. That would be, the second area. But I think the first kind of area would be in the local vehicle connection to the system.
Thank you.
Commissioner Seal, are you still with us? Karen?
I am.
Any questions for Scott?
So my question is, what would you say is your proudest accomplishment?
I'm sorry, one more time.
What is your proudest accomplishment?
Commissioner, I would say my proudest accomplishment would be delivering the I-4 connector, the most complex project and the benefits that are brought to our region.
Thank you. We will have follow-up.
Thank you.
Following up on John's question, how would you incorporate technology? Because it's going to come to us in the future, and we're not currently using it at the moment. How would you go about incorporating that into the transit system?
Well, the first thing I would pursue is making sure that not only myself but the staff is kept abreast of technology changing that is happening, within the transit world primarily right now. What is happening? What are other authorities and other client owners doing with their transit systems to advance the technology? An important part of that would be seeing what's being done by PSTA and HART. What their plans are for technology in the next 3 to 5 years. Keeping abreast with what industry is doing, seeing what our partners are doing. There are grants available from FTA to incorporate technology into your system. So I'd pursue those steps initially.
Mayor?
What do you see as the role of public-private partnerships in transportation and transit?
Well, having worked on one that, on actually two, US 19 was all, a segment of US 19 was also done as a bill finance project, Mayor. There is a significant role that they can play. Primarily, I think, for our project and for our region in the TOD arena for the development side. In my research of transit systems, only Canada, I believe, is the only country that does a complete system build-out as a public-private partnership where they hire a team to deliver, build, operate, and maintain a transit system for them. So,
thank you. Commissioner Kemp.
Florida has been pushing very hard in the autonomous connected vehicle world. I know you spoke a little bit about technology here, but not directly about that. And this region in particular has done so. And I have concerns that it hasn't been enough of consideration of both advantages, disadvantages, issues, problems, the future. For instance, what happens when autonomous vehicles are picking everybody up from the stadium and most of them are empty. You know, we don't even have single occupancy vehicle, we have negative occupancy vehicle, which takes up a lot of road space. What happens at intersections? I'm very concerned that we're marching ahead without proof of concept here, that we're willing to be the first, and that we will be the ones to make all the mistakes and be the Betamax of AV. And I'm just wondering what kinds of things that you think we should do moving forward to have a broader, better, more educated discussion before throwing all our eggs in that basket.
well, I think again on the autonomous vehicle topic, if you look at the vehicle operators of a BRT system, one difference is we won't be out in, or at least on a portion of the Catalyst project now, we'd only be in the general use lanes for a portion of the time we're there. I still think there's significant benefit to having each transit vehicle be equipped with the technology so they can understand what's happening in the surrounding area. As the vehicle is moving along the running way, knowing what's happening, you know, to the side and to adjacent to them, that would be important as well. Critical aspect would be knowing use of emergency vehicles, you know, when emergency vehicles are going to be operating in the area as well. I'm not quite sure what else we could do other than, you know, for autonomous vehicles, for, as you described, your concern about rushing ahead, because our vehicles are going to be separated for the most part from those that are going to be using the state or the national highway system.
Well, I'm concerned about how we move forward, thinking about them. I know there's a lot of talk about them being part of the Catalyst project, or quickly transitioning to that, or even before it's written. So, you know, I'm just wondering about, you know, how we get a thoughtful discussion and, you know, the thought of moving forward. Fine, connected vehicles, fine, but you're not talking about driverless and full automation, which I think is what people often consider.
Again, for my research into what the bus manufacturers are doing now, or vehicle manufacturers are doing now, that's not in the near-term horizon. That's farther out, even from when vehicles are using the regular general use lanes out on the interstate. I think what we could easily do would be to create an autonomous vehicle study group that includes representatives from PSTA and HART to focus on that particular topic, to see in that last mile transition what would suppliers be doing, what other systems would be connecting to ours, as well as what we could be doing with our own systems.
Mr. Starkey.
So as in the role of Executive Director of Tbarta, you'll be interacting with many elected officials, whether it's county or city or state, and maybe even in federal. So what do you think your leadership style is, and how comfortable are you in that role?
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I'm comfortable because I've had a lot of practice doing that with difficult projects as well. I learned, I was very humbled, and some of my mentors when I was on active duty said, if you're going to deliver this message, it has to be clear, concise, and convincing. And so that's kind of the approach I take to a lot of the presentations I've made. I think visual communication is very important, but it's trying to be as clear and concise as possible in communicating, because I understand elected officials have a unique and different perspective of a particular issue than either our authority or the Florida DOT, has of a particular issue, a transportation issue.
So based on what you know about the agency so far, what do you think the most difficult challenge would be for you as executive director in your first year? And what would your approach be to building the consensus with all the stakeholders that you would need in order to overcome that challenge?
I wouldn't see it as a challenge. I would, well, I guess I would have to refer to it as a challenge. I think the challenge would be to really elevating the stature, if you will, of Tbarta to be seen as a regional leader. That's going to take a lot of focused effort, I believe, by the board, to help me do that. But it's a matter of targeting and strategically communicating, where we are at and where we are going. It's the best way I can describe it. I learned at the department because I had the opportunity to go down and meet with, at that time we had 2 newspapers, but going to the editorial board and talking to them and explaining to them, we went down and talked to them about our stimulus projects and said, here's why we're doing this project, here are the benefits for doing this project. That is a huge tool to communicate out because we're in the largest media market in the state. I know the chairman has done radio interviews in the past. That's another, I think, avenue to help us communicate out, where we're at and where we're going. And then an area that we're not nearly participating in as much as in our social media areas. And that requires a complete re-engineering of our website, then being more active on social media to communicate out to the younger residents of our region where we're at and where we're going and what our purpose is.
Thank you, Mike. We'll get back to Commissioner Long. I think she took a break. As you know, Tbarta is going to have to look at multiple modal, transit options in the future. What do you see as a resident here of Tampa Bay, or some other options other than surface-based transportation, ferries, for example, aerial-based modes, autonomous vehicles we've discussed before? What do you see as potential other additional things to be looking at?
I think another option we could go back and look at is one of the options that's located, that's one of the priority projects, and that is to look at the rail option and kind of look at the passenger volumes that are there. There's a couple of dynamics that are happening in our region that could have significant impact on passengers and Tbarta customers in downtown Tampa, and that would be the potential for a high-speed rail station, to be constructed in downtown Tampa, as well as a new baseball stadium in Ybor City. Those two alone could have a significant impact on future Tbarta customers. So I would look at the rail option again. I think there's some work that can be done using the FTA model to kind of look at the forecasted passenger volumes that may be operating on some of those other projects, kind of put those side by side and get a better feel, for what those projects could be, could deliver. But I would look at the rail option again.
Thank you. Only?
I appreciate you answering my questions through your other answers, since I don't have any follow-up at this point.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, what do you find so compelling about this position as executive director?
To me, what's compelling is the opportunity to serve 4 million clients. I thoroughly enjoyed working at the Florida DOT. It was clearly personally and professionally rewarding to me to do that because of the team of people that I got to work with there, the consultant army, as I referred to them, and what we were able to achieve together. So the opportunity to go back and work with the department staff, both here and in Tallahassee, as well as the federal highway staff, some of them are there as well, that would be very, very compelling to me. But first and foremost, it would be the opportunity to serve this board, as well as to serve 4 million clients. Because when you're a consultant, you don't have nearly that many clients.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett.
Given the controversies that come when you're working with a regional board, people representing so many different interests, we have elected officials, we have gubernatorial appointees. What is something similar that you've worked for before, and how do you approach those controversies? And not to mention the public weighing in. Obviously, this is we answer to the public. So how would you approach the issues that come about from a group like Tbarta?
Again, my experience in dealing with controversy is trying to really understand the perspective of what is the basis for this controversy. Why is this controversy evolved, if we will, and why is this why is this viewpoint being taken to our project or what we're proposing to do? One of the most effective ways that I've learned to address it is if I can really understand kind of the basis for this controversy, it's then would be to present the facts that bear on that perception, or that are generating the controversy. One of my military mentors explained to me that when we're going to go in and do a 15-minute presentation on a controversial topic, we want to take the argument away. So we would put right into the presentation, one of the reasons we're doing this is because of this fact, that we know. So that would be, that's an effective way to kind of approach it in a respectful way, I must add, because you must respect, another person's and another organization's viewpoint and their perspective. If they believe that what you're doing is wrong, you have to respect that. All I can do is continue to present to the board, what I believe would be the correct course of action, and more importantly, why it's the correct course of action.
Thank you.
Next question.
No further questions, thank you.
Commissioner Seal.
I think she's gone.
Karen, are you still with us?
Karen, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah. I think she is off. Scott, thank you. That concludes the interview. Thank you for your time. Again, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's finish the next round.
Yeah. Oh, Esposito.
Let me poll the board. Would you guys prefer to have lunch now or wait till the final interview and then have the lunch? That was the schedule, but if everyone's hungry now, we can have a working lunch and eat and talk of questions.
Yeah.
I'm fine. So we can interview while we're eating.
That's
15-minute
Yeah.
recess?
Yeah. They just box lunches.
Yeah, in order to do that, let's take a 10-minute recess.
What?
10-minute recess for them to bring.
Okay, we'll bring them in so you can use them. It feels like you put to the minutes where.
Mike Millett. Commissioner John Mitten.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Kemp. Here. Commissioner Betsy Benak.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey. Here. Commissioner Karen Seal. Kathleen Shanahan. Commissioner Janet Long. Here. Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckhorn. You still have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Susan. Chair recognizes Greg Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The final candidate, as we continue down the list, is Mr. Robert Esposito. Bob is currently the Government Affairs Liaison for District 7 of FDOT. Earlier in his career, he worked as campaign manager for Senator Brandis' campaign back in 2009. Prior to that, he worked in a variety of different smaller organizations and also worked as a product manager for Tech Data Corporation, where he oversaw NAC computer monitors.
Showing the applicant, please.
Good morning. Oh, afternoon now.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Bob, and welcome. You can grab a box lunch if you want to eat while you interview.
Afterwards. I appreciate that.
Anyway, thank you, and thank you for your patience, and thank you for your time coming in today to talk to us. We appreciate it. The procedure will be for you to give a 3-minute introductory remarks on your qualifications, your desire to become the Executive Director of Tbarta, and you're passionate about it. And then we will have a round of questioning and then a follow-ups for you to answer.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
You have the floor now.
Thank you. Again, my name is Bob Esposito, and I wanted to thank the chairman of the board for this wonderful opportunity to be part of the Executive Director search. I was raised in this region. I've been here since 1970. I've raised my family here, and I have a huge passion for this area. And I would like to see nothing more than to see transit become successful within our region. Because of my current position with a key Tbarta stakeholder, I have developed the necessary contacts at both the state and federal levels to obtain the necessary money needed to build transit in our region. As many of you see in the packet I've submitted, the executive director position, I've received letters of support from both government and private individuals regarding my qualifications. Tbarta should be the go-to voice for the region regarding leading the transit initiative. My work with the state and local elected officials provides a foundation to help determine the best transit options for our region. I am positioned to engage the other key stakeholders for Tbarta to have our region become the one to speak with one voice as our statewide competitors, Orlando, Jacksonville, and South Florida, have successfully done. The Federal Transit Administration's capital investment program is highly competitive. We will be competing against highly rated projects from heavy hitters such as LA, DC, New York, San Francisco, Charlotte, and Portland. Tbarta should leverage the fact that we are the third most populous state and growing. With the region taking a collaborative approach and speaking with one voice, we will be able to get more money for the state and local initiatives. The Federal Transit Administration wants to put money on projects that they will get the best rate of return for their investment. With limited funding in the FTA Capital Investments Program, along with many projects currently in the pipeline, we will need a federal champion who will help us move our projects up in the queue, and we will need a strong legislative push to make that happen. We will recruit at least one federal, if not more, federal champions at the congressional level to make this happen. With Hernando, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pasco, and Pinellas working together, we will bring more money to the region as opposed to working against each other. Our region will be more likely to receive funds if we work together. This would also be the case for the state level for the State New Start Transit Program, which is going to be used for matching federal funds for major capital projects. By pooling all of our resources, our major stakeholders, the Tbarta board will be able to achieve their goals. My blend of private, government, and political experience and my ability to move in and out of these sectors will help Tbarta become the go-to voice for transit within the region. As Darrell LeClaire stated, I have the ability to navigate government bureaucracies and can also make a phone call and have individuals such as Darrell LeClaire, Jeff Finnick, Tom James, and other key business leaders in the room to help solve our transit initiatives. I am confident staff and I will pull this all together, and it would be an honor and a privilege to be selected as the next executive director for Tbarta.
Thank you, Bob. We'll start the round of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, first, I've had a message from someone in the audience that they can't hear you. Could you pull that mic off and see if that mic is on? Pull this off like this. Is it red? Pull your little, pull this off. Is that red?
It's red.
Okay, if you don't mind maybe speaking a little closer into that mic.
Okay.
It might just be, it was a little lower.
Okay.
Can everyone in the audience hear now?
No, I couldn't hear him.
I couldn't hear very well.
Probably need to leave right in.
In between my.
So maybe just speak up a little.
Will do.
Good afternoon, Bob. In your view, what are the most significant challenges facing Tbarta and transit in the Tampa Bay region over the next few years, and how would you address these challenges?
Again, I think we need to bring all the stakeholders with Tbarta together. And the key thing that I think we need to do is speak with one voice and develop a regional plan that we can bring to the FDA. Because again, they are limited on their funds, and we're going up against those heavy hitters. And for us to get, where there's a pipeline full of projects ahead of us, for us to get moved up in the queue, we're going to have a couple of federal champions.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Bob. I know it's difficult being the last one, especially as it's gone on this long. Would you describe for us a transit project that you've been involved in the last couple of years? Talk about what your role was in that project, whether it was implemented, and what costs and funding sources were used for that project.
Well, one of the projects that I was involved in is the 41-mile BRT. I helped to connect the dots of from Wesley Chapel down to the city of St. Pete. About a year ago, I was talking to Ming Gao trying to figure out what are we going to do to help solve the issues in our region, and we had an opportunity to bring express lanes out of downtown St. Pete, which I think you know are now on the Pinellas County MPO plan. That had been shelved by prior administration. And when Ming Gao said this was a very easy project to put forward because we had most of the right-of-way, I walked into Secretary David Gwynn's office and I said, I'd like you to talk to Ming Gao because we can now increase that 41-mile BRT. And one of the benefits of having the express lanes coming out of downtown St. Petersburg is that we will be able to go from downtown St. Petersburg to downtown Tampa via Gandy Boulevard, because Thea will have their elevated completed in a couple of years. We'll also be able to go to Tampa International Airport and St. Pete Clearwater International Airport, never hitting a traffic signal. And I believe that is a huge win for the region.
Thank you.
As you're well aware, most of the board, I'm not a supporter of the Catalyst project. And I know you've been involved, so maybe you can answer some questions about it. In terms of, one of my issues with it is, of the $455 million, only $15 million is being spent on 11 buses, as it's proposed now. That could carry 60 people in each bus, at most 660 people in the system at once, if every bus was full. But they can only travel half the time. So basically, 330 people can be carried each hour on the route. So if so, why in the world, and if you can explain this to me, I'd love to know, most of the money in the entire thing, something close to $430 million, is spent on major parking garages, 9,000 spaces for 330 people an hour, basically 9,000 spaces. Why in the world would that be a wise investment to make?
Well, I'd have to look into that a little bit deeper as far as the parking spaces, but I think what the idea is to start the project, and as the project becomes successful, we can add more buses onto that system. And
what if that doesn't happen? Why would you build 9,000 parking spaces? Why is that the major part of the expenditure? It's on $430 million. And would you recommend that change then?
well, maybe we can start with fewer parking garages we've got to get the project started somewhere. And so maybe we can go back and reduce the number of parking garages that are on the table right now, and as the program grows and it becomes successful, then we can add the parking garages down the road. But that would be absolutely something I would want to look into.
And what about parking that's now available? Why couldn't we use that?
If we have enough parking, I think we could use that, and that's something we should look into, and that's something that I would bring back to the board and work on as a decision together.
Commissioner Starkey.
Bob, describe your vision for Tbarta 10 years from now.
Tbarta should be the go-to voice for this region. Tbarta should be the umbrella of transit for the region. And I believe Tbarta, when we start with a plan, and we start with the BRT, and we work with the locals so they can develop their plans to network their plans off of our system, we can always add other routes. We can incorporate other BRT routes. We can incorporate possibly rail. I believe every mode of transportation is on the table, and I think we need to be looking at that.
Mike?
Yep. Hi, Bob.
Mike.
You have significant legislative affairs experience and contacts, which is relevant and important for this role of the executive director, but so too is operational expertise. So can you speak to what type of operational experience you've had around the areas of finance, compliance, and sort of strategic goal setting and execution?
Well, I will work with, our key stakeholders on the areas that I'm not comfortable with. I will pick it up very quickly. Finance, when I worked for a company called Tbarta, I was in charge of a division that was a $60 million budget. I turned it into a $200 million budget by looking at sales of profit and loss, managed complete inventory, marketing, sales initiatives. What I don't know, I have the resources and aptitude to figure out quickly, but I will work with all of the stakeholders, the key stakeholders, not only from the side of possibly FDOT, but our stakeholders on the business side, including the Tampa Bay Partnership, West Shore Alliance, everybody that's involved in the success of Tbarta.
Yes, good afternoon, Bob. And
good afternoon,
thank you
Commissioner.
for your interest and for being here this afternoon. My question has two parts.
Yes, ma'am.
And the first one is, what is the significance and importance of the triennial review? And what is the outcome if you do not cross your I's and cross your T's?
Well, I think we're going to have annual reviews or
No. The question is, what is the significance and importance of the triennial review?
To make sure that we're moving forward in the right direction and that we're on the same page and that the board is meeting their goals and their objectives. And I work for the board. I will put together the ideas for you and you take it forward and I follow your direction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Janet. Bob, in your role as Legislative Affairs Director for District 7, you have a breadth of wide contacts throughout the state. Specifically, can you tell us how you can leverage some of those contacts to benefit Tbarta in terms of funding or getting our Catalyst project or other projects, in the hopper moving along?
Absolutely. Well, obviously, the current stakeholder I work for is a key stakeholder with Tbarta, leveraging their funds, their expertise, but we also need to leverage the power that we have in this region. We have incoming Senate President Calvano. Following that, we have incoming President Simpson, and Representative Chris Prowse. We need to leverage those funds, and we also need to reach out and have at least one or two federal champions at the federal level to help us to get those FTA capital investment funds, and that's what my plan would be. And I have those resources to do that.
Thank you. Melanie?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
On the times in your career when you've worked on a team, how would your fellow team members describe your leadership style, and what do you do to motivate and encourage others?
You know, I would think most of my team members would say that I'm hardworking, I'm effective, and I come in it with a collaborative approach. Every idea is on the table. We develop a plan, and I want to know not only what the strengths are, but I want to know what the holes are in the plan. And when we can figure out that as a group, we can develop the best plan possible going forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Mitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on your knowledge of Tbarta, its history, if I were to give you a magic wand and you could change anything about it, what would be the one thing you would first change?
Again, I think we need to go out and we need to have federal champions on our side, because it's critical that we leverage those FTA dollars. We are going up against, again, cities like Portland, New York, LA, and they're putting together highly rated plans. And even if we have a highly rated plan, medium highly rated plan, if we don't have the push from the federal level, we're not going to get moved up in the queue. It's absolutely critical that we leverage those federal dollars.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benak.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
So Tbarta is currently a very small organization, but with many representatives that serve on the board, a large area. How would you approach coming into Tbarta, the organization, in creating what we need to create to be able to become a regional transit agency?
Again, I think we all need to sit down with a collaborative approach, and we need to work together to come up with a project for Tbarta to move forward. We can't get everything we want right out of the gate, but we have to start somewhere. And by getting a consensus from the board and we find the right project, that's where we'll start, we'll move together, and then we'll build the network off of there.
Thank you. Next question.
At the Florida Department of Transportation, we spend a considerable amount of time talking about connected and autonomous vehicle technology and how it might impact our transportation infrastructure in the not-too-distant future. Do you envision connected and autonomous vehicle technology to be influencing future decision-making at Tbarta, and if so, in what fashion?
Well, I do believe autonomous vehicles are going to will be an impact in the future, but I believe we're decades away. And we need to have some resolution now. We need to find all modes of transit. I believe autonomous vehicles are going to be wonderful, but I do not believe they're going to solve all the problems that we have. And I think they're going to be an instrumental part of transit in the future. But again, I think we're decades away from that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Has Commissioner Seal rejoined the conversation? Okay, I think Karen had to drop off due to a prior commitment, so we'll go around for follow-up questions.
Bob, you talked a lot about FTA, and that requires local matches. How would you go about working with the local officials on that to get that local match?
Well, we're going to have to develop the locals. We're going to have to work on a budgeting program that we're going to need from the locals. We are going to need their help. So for their local transit initiative needs, if they want to have the federal dollars, we have to develop a plan and a funding source for all of the locals that are going to be part of this regional process.
President.
Bob, why do you believe that you are most uniquely qualified to lead Tbarta?
Well, I think I bring a blend of private, government, and political experience to the arena. I can move in and out of these sectors quickly. I can leverage the elected officials at the state level to help bring state dollars, and I can leverage the federal elected officials to bring the federal dollars. I will work closely with the locals to help figure out a funding source for their portion of the needs of the transit that we're going to put together.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kim.
Well, I've heard rail raised several times by different members on this panel, and you raised it yourself. And I know that you've been very involved and understand the Tbarta legislation, and you must know that in Tbarta legislation there's a bar, which we just had pointed out to us with certainty, to ever getting involved in rail or doing any support of rail or bringing that forward. So when you say rail and pursuing rail, then do you mean that you think that that should be removed and that we should legislatively pursue Tbarta from removing that bar on our legislation? Or what are you suggesting? You're not suggesting that you could possibly do that unless we remove that barrier.
I'm not saying rail's off the table. I'm saying everything's on the table, but
Well, that's what I'm responding to. We're barred in Tbarta in our legislation from promoting rail or pushing it at the legislature. So would you remove that barrier? Would you suggest that we legislatively change our charter and make sure that we remove that so we can pursue rail?
I wouldn't want to see it removed. I want to see how we can move forward and do what Orlando has done with Osceola, Orlando, Volusia, Seminole working together.
So you don't understand that we have a barrier to doing that now. So you don't understand that? We're legislatively barred from doing so.
Well, then maybe I would talk to the board and see where we can maybe make some changes
So would you
within.
suggest that that would be part of what we do so that we can pursue rail?
I think everything's on the table, and that's what we need to do, then that's what I would do.
I guess good afternoon. Good afternoon. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to participate in the interviews yesterday. I've been dealing with actually NAFTA 2.0. But I do have a question for you on your resume, because I find it very interesting that you have many places where you've worked for 1 year, maybe 2. So could you explain those, your career path?
Yes, absolutely. I owned my own business for a couple of years, and it was with a business partner. We didn't agree eye to eye. He bought me out on that business. I, at one point, thought I wanted to get into the insurance industry, and I went to work for Wallace, Welch, and Willingham, and I really didn't want to do the commercial side of it, so I went to a company called State Farm. And back in the time frame of about 04, 05 with the hurricane season, the insurance industry changed drastically. I was going to go work on getting my own State Farm agency. The gentleman I worked for decided to retire, and I didn't blame him, because his business was going down, and his retirement was based on his last 5 years. And I just didn't want to get to the point where I was only going to be selling life insurance and auto insurance. I wanted to do the whole gamut. And that's when I had the opportunity to get into the government side, working on a campaign. And now that I'm on the government side, I love it.
Okay, just very curious. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Mike?
Bob, you mentioned the necessity to leverage state and federal resources for Tbarta's planning and eventual implementation of its ultimate plan. What do you think the biggest hurdles are to overcome with respect to both state and federal funding that we're going to need to go forward?
Again, we're going to have to put together a plan that's highly rated, and to get those federal funds, we're going to have to get a federal champion to help us move up in the queue against the big competitors that we have, not only statewide, but nationally as well. Sunrail was very successful over in Orlando because of Congressman Micah being a champion, and we have any number of our congressmen and women in our area that we can reach out to and help us leverage those dollars. I think that's very critical.
Commissioner Long?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I have several questions, but this probably isn't the correct venue to ask them in, and so I'll pass.
We'll defer.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about tech data and how that blends in with your managerial experience, how that could be a benefit here in working with Tbarta?
Again, I was hired on to manage a budget of $60 million for a division of tech data, and within that division, I had to work across the whole spectrum with the product, with the marketing teams, with the sales teams, and it was completely my responsibility to manage profit and loss, manage the inventories, manage the marketing skills or marketing programs, as well as manage the overall sales initiatives. And the way I grew that budget is I looked at what our competitors were doing. Ingram Micro was the largest distributor in the country. They were doing twice the sales of tech data, but within the division that I had, they were doing 4 times the sales. That didn't make sense to me. So I talked to the product representatives. I said, why don't we lower our project margins just a little bit, increase our inventory levels so we could be competitive and have enough inventory on hand in that region. If you don't have inventory and somebody needs 400 monitors now and you don't have them, they don't wait. And by just short-term lowering our profit margins, I was able to increase inventories, and within less than 2 years, I grew that line from 60 to $200+ million.
May I ask a follow-up question to your question?
Yes, ma'am.
So it says in your resume you were there from 1999 to 2000.
Right.
Is that 1 year or is that 2
No,
years?
I was there at the beginning of '99, less than end of 2000.
And then where did you go after there? Because then there's a gap in your, there's a gap in here.
Yeah, I left the business, and that's when I started to look into pursuing into some of the insurance industries.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Melanie?
I appreciated our one-on-one yesterday, and you've done a great job at answering all my questions today in the follow-up, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
I also have no further questions.
Commissioner Banac?
Just, because you're familiar with Tbarta, and you know we have struggled to find funding to keep us going. It's one thing to have a project that we can focus on, but how do we have a Tbarta organization? How would you approach funding to keep Tbarta going as an organization?
Well, as an organization, I will work again with key stakeholder, FDOT, and I'm going to work with the state legislators closely. And as we show them that we're putting projects on the table, they're going to help fund this. They want this to succeed. This was put together in 2007, and the idea of it was to bring a regional aspect. Again, I'll refer back to why we're losing money in this region. Orlando, Jacksonville, South Florida have been very effective at their counties working together. That doesn't mean you need to combine your MPOs. You just need to have a regional plan, and then the MPOs can work within their own plans as well. But we need regional projects to move this area forward.
No further questions, thank you. Has Commissioner Seal rejoined or been able to rejoin? Nope. No other questions then? Thank you, Bob. That concludes the interview, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was an honor and a privilege. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Sue, we are now going to accept public comment. For the benefit of the audience, can you read the public service announcement, please?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
Okay, I think Anthony had reserved comment on this first, but do you want to defer to Mr. Homans?
I'll fill out my card first.
Get it? Recognizes Anthony Palmieri.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Anthony Palmieri for the record. Today, you will be selecting the next Tbarta Executive Director. Having been on the Tbarta CAC for 8 years and having witnessed several changes in executive director, I know what this could do for the organization. What we need at this point is some stability. Tbarta is involved in this long-range project, transportation project, that may very well last anywhere from 4 to 5 years. And I think whoever we select today should be able to commit himself or herself to remain on board for such a long period. This would not only will provide some stability, but also provide continuity on the project. I think it's very important. I don't want to delay this thing, so please consider that when you make your decision. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your service. Chair recognizes Rick Homans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Just very briefly, because I know you want to get to your discussion. Number one, thank you for the conscientious effort that the search committee and the board has put into this decision. It's clearly the most important decision that you'll be making as a board, hiring your executive director. On behalf of the leaders of the partnership, and after reviewing all of the resumes and listening to the questions and answers today, I think that you have done an amazing job of bringing before you a very qualified candidate, 4 candidates, but one that rises above all of the rest. And David Green, in our opinion, is exceptional. He is somebody who not only brings the CEO experience as a leader, but also the diverse experience of finance and procurement and grants and running an actual transit operation, brings the private sector experience as well. We think that is the kind of individual that we all had in mind when we repurposed and redirected Tbarta, and will help us to achieve the kind of goals that we have. So we hope you will consider his candidacy and take action on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Chair recognizes Tom Nacera.
Good afternoon. I also agree that you've brought forward 4 very good candidates, and you should be commended on the quality of the candidates that you brought here today. No doubt this is going to be a difficult decision to make. I sat in on it with the hope of hearing more about the candidates' experience with regard to private-public partnerships for obvious reasons. It's my conclusion, if we're here to add support to candidates, that I saw 2 candidates that I felt I'd be very comfortable working with. I liked the energy level of, I believe it's Carrie Butler. I liked her energy. She reminded me a little bit of Catherine Egan, I think, in some ways. I also liked the experience and the professionalism that Scott brought forward. His experience and depth of knowledge of the workings of FDOT. No doubt that would be a huge plus for him. So I just wanted to mention that if I were calling the shots, it'd be between those 2 people, and I don't envy your position to have to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Sue, any other comments? Anyone else in the audience wishing to make public comment at this time or is on the phone? None being heard, I will close public comment. Thank you. The board will now deliberate on the evidence we have before us. And first, I'd like to thank everyone for their patience today, and especially the ad hoc committee for all the good work they did. We heard from, I thought, 4 very, very qualified and good candidates, and we have our work cut out for us. Just a little bit of editorializing. Commissioner Kim